It was March the 25th, 2022 in Mayfield, a quiet suburb of Newcastle, Australia. 21-year-old Mackenzie Anderson, known as Max to her friends, was at home in her modest apartment on Crebot Street. She was a young mother, her life revolving around her 23-month-old son. Around 10:40 p.m., a frantic call reached the local police. A neighbor, startled by screams, reported a disturbance at Mackenzie's apartment. The police rushed to the scene. When they arrived at the Mayfield Street apartment, they found a horrific scene. Mackenzie was born and raised in Newcastle, New South Wales, in a close-knit family. Her mother, Tabitha Ackret, a dental hygienist, was a pillar of support. Their bond was evident in the heartfelt tributes Tabitha later shared. Mackenzie was also close to her stepfather and friends, who described her as the heart of their circle. She had a knack for making people laugh, often sharing snippets of her life on social media, where her TikTok videos captured her humor and strength as a young mother. Her son was her world, and she poured her energy into creating a stable life for him despite the hardships she faced. Mackenzie's life hadn't been easy. By her early 20s, she was navigating the challenges of single motherhood while living in a modest unit on Crebot Street. Friends said she was determined to break free from a cycle of hardship, working to provide for her son and dreaming of a brighter future. Her relationship with Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, cast a long shadow over her life. The two began dating in late 2019, and their on-again, off-again relationship was marked by turbulence. By October 2021, Thompson had been jailed for assaulting Mackenzie, intimidating her, and damaging her property. An apprehended violence order was in place, meant to keep Thompson away from Mackenzie, prohibiting any contact or visits to her home. He served a short sentence with a non-parole period of just over 4 months and was released on March 9, 2022. Mackenzie's friends later revealed Mackenzie lived in constant fear, convinced Thompson would come after her once he was free. Then, she messaged a friend, saying that Tyrone had just gotten out of jail and was still being weird, harassing her. Despite the AVO, Thompson reached out to Mackenzie almost immediately after his release, calling her and sending messages from multiple social media accounts. One heartbreaking detail emerged later. Mackenzie had ordered for a new set of knives for Christmas 2021, a practical gift for her home. Those same knives would later become part of the tragedy. The night of March 25, 2022, started like any other in the quiet suburb of Mayfield, but beneath the surface of this ordinary night, a tragedy was unfolding. Mackenzie's apartment on Mayfield was a small, unassuming unit in a block of flats, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by sight, even by name. That evening, she wasn't alone. A male friend, whose identity was closely guarded in early reports, was with her, along with her 23-month-old son, who was likely asleep in his crib. Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, was also present at some point during the night, despite the apprehended violence order that barred him from contacting her or visiting her home. The details of how Thompson ended up at her apartment remain murky, but court records later revealed that he had been asked to leave multiple times that evening. His refusal to comply set the stage for what would become a devastating confrontation. In panic, a neighbor dialed emergency services, describing a scene that sounded dire: a woman's voice in distress, a man's voice shouting, and the unmistakable sense that something was terribly wrong. The urgency was clear enough to prompt an immediate response from the Newcastle City Police District. When police arrived at the apartment block, they were met with a harrowing sight. Mackenzie lay lifeless on the veranda outside her unit, her body surrounded by blood. The scene was chaotic, with paramedics soon joining the officers in a frantic attempt to save her. Despite their best efforts, Mackenzie was pronounced dead at the scene. Her injuries were too severe to overcome. Her toddler son, found inside the apartment, was mercifully unharmed. Police found a man at the scene, later identified as Tyrone Thompson, sitting cross-legged legged at the top of the communal stairs, his hand bloodied and injured. He was loud and demanding medical attention for his wound. A broken knife handle and blade were found near Mackenzie, stark evidence of the brutality that had unfolded. Thompson was arrested and taken to hospital under police guard for treatment of his injury. The tragedy was the culmination of events that had been building for weeks. After his release from prison on March 9, 2022, Thompson immediately breached the apprehended violence order. He began contacting Mackenzie, calling her, messaging her from multiple social media accounts, and even reaching out to people close to her new partner. Court documents later revealed that Mackenzie had spent much of the previous 6 days with Thompson. Despite her fear of him, friends said she felt trapped, unsure how to break free from his persistent attempts to reconnect. That night, Thompson and a male friend were among those gathered at her apartment. Though the exact dynamics remain unclear, tensions escalated. The male friend, who had left earlier in the evening, returned to check on her, only to witness a horrific scene. Thompson standing over Mackenzie, who was already on the ground. Investigators later learned that Mackenzie had been trying to protect herself in the days leading up to that night. She had reached out to domestic violence advocacy groups, emailing them to request help with security measures like cameras and reinforced doors. The night of March 25th wasn't a sudden explosion of violence, but the culmination of a pattern of control and intimidation. Yet, the system allowed him back into her life just 16 days before her death. The AVO, meant to be her shield, was little more than a piece of paper. The Newcastle City Police District launched a meticulous investigation to uncover what had happened in those chaotic final moments. The investigation began at the crime scene itself. Detectives meticulously combed through Mackenzie's apartment, cataloging every detail. The veranda where her body was found was a focal point, marked by bloodstains and the shattered remnants of a knife. Forensic teams collected the fragments, knowing they could hold critical clues about the weapon and its wielder. Inside the apartment, officers found signs of a disturbance, overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and traces of blood that hinted at a confrontation that had moved from inside to the veranda. Digital evidence also became a cornerstone of the investigation. Mackenzie's phone and social media accounts revealed a trail of fear and desperation. Investigators found messages between Mackenzie and Thompson showing they had been in contact since his release. Some exchanges were tense, others oddly amicable, suggesting a complex dynamic. Thompson had also messaged people close to Mackenzie's new partner, attempting to gather information or assert control. These communications, pulled from servers and cross-referenced with phone records, showed he had breached the AVO multiple times. Detectives also explored Mackenzie's broader relationships. They interviewed her mother, Tabitha, who shared her daughter's fears about Thompson. In a statement to the court, later reported by the Newcastle Herald, Tabitha said, "Mackenzie lived in constant fear after Thompson's release." Mackenzie told Tabitha he wouldn't let her go. Friends echoed this, describing how Mackenzie had confided in them about Thompson's persistent attempts to reconnect. One friend told police she wanted to protect her son but felt trapped, like there was no way out. During police questioning, Thompson's statements were guarded but revealing. According to court reports later cited by the Newcastle Herald, he claimed the incident was a chaotic misunderstanding. He admitted to being at Mackenzie's apartment that night despite the AVO but insisted he had been invited. He described an argument that escalated, alleging that Mackenzie had been the aggressor, wielding a knife in a heated moment. His account painted a picture of self-defense, claiming his hand injury came from trying to disarm her. Though his story shifted under scrutiny, with inconsistencies about the sequence of events, he denied any intent to harm her. However, his explanation struggled to align with the physical evidence. The broken knife, Mackenzie's fatal injuries, and witness accounts of her desperation to escape. Detectives pressed Thompson about his actions in the days leading up to the incident, confronting him with evidence of his repeated AVO breaches, including messages and calls to Mackenzie and her associate. Thompson downplayed these breaches, claiming he was trying to sort things out and maintain a connection for the sake of their shared history. As Thompson remained in custody, the investigation continued to solidify the case. Forensic reports confirmed Mackenzie's blood on the knife and Thompson's DNA on the handle, strengthening the link to the crime. The autopsy of Mackenzie Anderson revealed she suffered 78 stab wounds inflicted in less than 3 minutes. On March 27, 2022, Thompson was formally charged with murder, breaching an AVO, and related offenses stemming from the events of that night. The murder charge was anchored by compelling evidence, knife fragments bearing Mackenzie's blood, witness accounts of her screams, and Thompson's presence at the scene with a suspicious injury. Additional charges included intimidating behavior, reflecting his pattern of harassment in the weeks prior. The motive, while not explicitly stated by Thompson, emerged through the investigation's findings. Detectives and domestic violence experts consulted concluded Thompson's actions stemmed from a need to regain control of Mackenzie, who was trying to move on with her life and protect her son. The presence of Mackenzie's male friend that night may have been a catalyst, intensifying Thompson's fixation. The charges against Thompson were a step toward justice. They also highlighted the failures that allowed him to remain a threat. By early 2025, the case had reached a critical juncture in the Newcastle Supreme Court, where the pursuit of justice for the 21-year-old mother unfolded. Initially set for a 4-week trial starting April 7, 2025, the case took a dramatic turn when Tyrone Thompson, then 25, changed his plea on April 1, 2025, in the New South Wales Supreme Court. He pleaded guilty to the domestic violence murder of Mackenzie Anderson, halting the need for a full trial. This plea came after years of denials, during which he had maintained his innocence even as evidence mounted against him. The guilty plea was a significant moment, sparing Mackenzie's family the pain of a protracted trial, but shifting the focus to the sentencing hearing, where the court would determine the consequences of his actions. The hearing, presided over by Justice Richard Weinstein, became a pivotal moment for all involved. The prosecution, led by Crown Prosecutor Brendan Queenan, presented a harrowing case. They argued that Thompson's actions on March 25, 2022, were a brutal culmination of a pattern of control and violence. Court documents detailed how Thompson, on parole for prior domestic violence offenses against Mackenzie, ignored an apprehended violence order and broke into her Mayfield apartment twice that night. Using 2 kitchen knives, he stabbed her 78 times in less than 3 minutes, an attack so ferocious that one knife snapped. The prosecution emphasized Mackenzie's vulnerability, noting her repeated attempts to seek safety through advocacy groups and her fear that Thompson would harm her after his release. The defense, representing Thompson, acknowledged the gravity of his actions, but sought leniency by highlighting mitigating factors. They argued that Thompson's mental health issues and challenging background diminished his moral culpability. His legal team submitted that he was not psychotic at the time of the crime, but struggled with emotional instability, which contributed to the escalation. Then, an apology letter from Thompson was tendered, in which he expressed regret, stating, "No words can undo the pain and devastation he caused to someone he genuinely loved." However, the prosecution challenged this, with Queenan noting there is some element of victim blaming. Justice Weinstein, wary of the letter's sincerity, remarked that it offered limited insight into true remorse. On May 1, 2025, Justice Weinstein delivered the sentence. Thompson was jailed for a maximum of 22 years 6 months, with a non-parole period of 15 years 6 months, making him eligible for parole in 2038. The judge described the attack as a frenzied act of such ferocity that it left Mackenzie's family shattered. Noting their helplessness, despair, and anger, he acknowledged the aggravating factors, including Thompson's prior violence and Mackenzie's fear, but also considered his guilty plea and personal circumstances when setting the term. The sentence sparked immediate outrage from Mackenzie's family, particularly her mother, Tabitha Ackert. Outside the Newcastle Supreme Court, she collapsed in tears, telling reporters that whilst it might be thought of as a good outcome for the courts, they were disgusted that that sentence was what they thought the value of her daughter's life was worth. She called the sentence an insult to women globally and demanded an appeal. On May 14, 2025, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions announced it would appeal Thompson's sentence, arguing that it was manifestly inadequate given the severity of the crime. Tabitha welcomed the decision, stating, "This is the first hurdle to getting a sentence that is more in line with community and moral standards." The appeal, set for a 2-hour hearing in the Court of Criminal Appeal on August 8, 2025, aims to increase Thompson's jail time. Prosecutors are citing the need to set a stronger precedent against domestic violence offenders. The case's current status leaves Thompson in prison, awaiting the appeal's outcome. While Mackenzie's family continues their advocacy, the appeal could reshape the sentence, but no verdict can undo the loss. For Mackenzie's son, now in the care of relatives and her loved ones, the fight is as much about honoring her memory as it is about ensuring others don't suffer the same fate. The question lingers: will the legal system deliver a punishment that reflects the true cost of Mackenzie's life, or will it fall short again? Julie Irene Oldag, later known as Julie Keown, had a peaceful and happy childhood in the town of Plattsburgh, Missouri, located in the heart of the American Midwest. Born on May 16, 1973, she was the eldest of 2 children. Growing up alongside her younger brother, Chad, Julie's parents, Nancy and Jack, were well-respected members of the community. They lived modestly but comfortably, sustained by their farm work. Growing up on the farm taught Julie responsibility and humility. Julie left a lasting impression on everyone she met. She was empathetic, selfless, and always ready to help others, with a calming presence that put people at ease. Her quiet strength and sense of purpose developed early. Academically, she excelled thanks to the support of her loving family. She attended high-quality schools and consistently earned praise from her teachers. Her compassion eventually inspired her to pursue a career in nursing. Determined to make a difference, she enrolled at William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri. There, she not only thrived academically, but also formed close friendships. However, she sometimes felt as though something was missing. Seeing many of her friends embark on romantic relationships, Julie was eager to find someone to spend her life with. Through a mutual friend, she was set up on a blind date with fellow student James Keown. James, a year younger than Julie, had a personality that contrasted with hers. Charismatic, outgoing, and ambitious, James was well known on campus for his work at the college radio station and his aspirations for a career in broadcasting. Coming from a privileged background, James was the son of a respected lobbyist and his wife, Betty, who had high hopes for their 6 children. James stood out in his family for his bold, confident personality and ability to command attention, traits that were both admired and controversial. In Julie, he found a calm, gentle presence that complemented his own strong energy. Meanwhile, Julie was attracted to James's drive and enthusiasm. Their connection was instantaneous, and they soon became inseparable, forming a well-known couple on campus. While still in college, James began working as a local radio host, quickly becoming a familiar voice in the community. Julie remained focused on her nursing studies and clinical training, preparing for the challenges of her career. After graduating, they married and moved to Kansas City, eager to build their life together. Both flourished professionally. Julie became a nurse whose empathy and dedication to her work made her exceptional. She treated each patient with care and respect, earning the admiration of her colleagues and superiors. Meanwhile, James continued to advance in his radio career, managing roles at 2 stations and steadily building his reputation. Together, they appeared to have a perfect life, young, ambitious, and dedicated to their professions. Their relationship was built on shared values, mutual support, and a balance of Julie's calm demeanor and James's outgoing nature. However, as James's career grew, so did the demands on his time. His schedule became packed with meetings and side projects, leaving little time for rest or quality time together. Although their home was filled with love, it often felt empty due to their busy lives. Both juggled early mornings, long days, and late nights, caught up in a fast-paced rhythm. Despite his hectic schedule, James made an effort to keep their relationship strong. He surprised Julie with weekend trips and thoughtful gifts, small tokens of his affection that she deeply appreciated, even though she never asked for them. Julie adored James deeply, her love for him unwavering and steadfast. Since James's career required frequent moves, they adapted by living in cities like Chicago before eventually returning to Kansas. Although these relocations were challenging, Julie supported James wholeheartedly, adjusting to each new environment with grace. James was known professionally for his creativity, adaptability, and sharp mind. With a background in marketing, his skills and innovative ideas made him an invaluable employee, which was reflected in his impressive income. His family enjoyed a comfortable and privileged lifestyle, owning a beautiful home and traveling frequently. He appreciated luxury, wearing fine watches, driving new cars, and regularly upgrading them. In contrast, Julie valued simple pleasures. Her family noticed how well she seemed to be doing and felt happy about her marriage to James, which outwardly appeared both harmonious and successful. As time passed, relatives began to inquire about their plans to have children. However, for James and Julie, this was a painful subject. They had been trying to conceive for years without success, despite undergoing countless tests, consulting specialists, and exploring every available option. There was no medical explanation for their infertility. Despite the hardship, they remained hopeful and continued with their lives, bearing the heavy weight of uncertainty. James redirected his focus to his career, pursuing personal growth and professional recognition. Already well regarded in his local community as a radio presenter, James set his sights higher. In 2003, he applied to Harvard Business School and was accepted with a prestigious scholarship. This achievement transformed their lives. They moved to Boston so James could start his studies. While Julie transitioned to remote work in medical software development, James also took on remote marketing projects. Although Julie wholeheartedly supported his ambitions, the move created emotional challenges for her. She missed her family, their home in Missouri, and the sense of familiarity she had left behind. Nevertheless, her love for James and her pride in his accomplishments kept her devoted to him. At Harvard, James surrounded himself with influential people and worked hard to build an impressive public image. Yet, despite his many achievements, he always seemed to crave more. Meanwhile, Julie continues to hope for a baby, although her health begins to decline alarmingly. Around 8 months after their move to Boston, she started experiencing constant fatigue, muscle pain, and frequent illnesses. Multiple medical exams provided no clear answers. Then, on August 20th, 2004, her condition suddenly took a turn for the worse. She woke up disoriented, with severe headaches, and found herself unable to perform basic tasks. She slurred her words, struggled to write, and felt the world spinning. Alarmed, James rushed her to the hospital, where her symptoms quickly worsened. Doctors immediately recognized the seriousness of her condition and conducted urgent tests. Suspicion fell on her kidneys as her health declined rapidly. By August 2004, Julie received life-changing news: her kidneys were no longer functioning properly. This became the first real clue to her long-standing health struggles, including infertility, though the connection was not fully understood. Despite extensive testing, her symptoms, muscle weakness, confusion, and fatigue did not align entirely with typical kidney failure cases. Some doctors initially suspected that Julie might have a rare kidney condition, but they were unable to arrive at a definitive diagnosis. After spending 3 days in the hospital, her condition unexpectedly improved without any clear medical intervention. With no solid explanation for her symptoms beyond potential kidney issues, she was discharged. Although the doctors were baffled, her symptoms eased, and she became eager to move forward, hoping to recover both emotionally and physically. She took a short trip to Missouri to visit her family, surrounded by loved ones and the comforting familiarity of home. Julie's spirits lifted, her strength returned, and her family was relieved to see her smiling and full of energy once more. It seemed the worst was behind her. However, this relief was short-lived. Not long after returning to Boston, Julie's health declined again. Her symptoms, dizziness, fatigue, and speech difficulties resurfaced. Albeit less severe than before, her family grew increasingly concerned, speculating that her episodes might have a psychological origin, perhaps stemming from the stress of relocating, the emotional strain of infertility, or even feelings of homesickness. Even Julie's doctors entertained the possibility that stress was a contributing factor. Yet, despite these theories, the possibility of a more serious underlying condition couldn't be ruled out. Tragically, on September 4, 2004, just 2 weeks after her initial hospitalization, Julie's condition took a dramatic and alarming turn for the worse. She was admitted to the hospital again, gravely ill, barely able to speak, nearly completely paralyzed, and soon slipping into a coma. It became evident to the medical team that her kidneys were not the primary issue. Something far more destructive and mysterious was ravaging her body. Despite extensive testing, the doctors were unable to pinpoint the cause, and Julie's organs began to fail one by one. In an unexpected breakthrough, a nurse made a critical suggestion: conduct a toxicology screening. Although such a test was uncommon in cases like Julie's, the nurse's intuition proved to be pivotal. The toxicology report revealed a horrifying truth. Julie had ethylene glycol in her system, a poisonous chemical commonly found in antifreeze and engine coolant. The symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning, kidney failure, confusion, and severe physical decline matched Julie's condition perfectly. The report confirmed she had been deliberately poisoned. As Julie lay comatose and unresponsive on September 4th, her family rushed to the hospital, devastated by her deterioration, helpless to do anything but wait. They watched her condition worsen. After 4 days in a coma, on September 8, 2004, Julie passed away at the age of 31. Despite the relentless efforts of the medical team, the diagnosis had come too late. Her body had suffered too much damage to recover. Her sudden death left her family and friends in shock. Only days earlier, she had been laughing and talking with her loved ones. Now, she was gone. The toxicology findings immediately raised suspicions of foul play. Julie's parents were convinced that someone had intentionally poisoned her, and all signs pointed to someone close to her. Suspicion quickly fell on her husband, James. Detectives launched an investigation, as the presence of ethylene glycol automatically triggered a criminal inquiry. They gathered medical records, household items, and witness statements to piece together what had happened. Publicly, James presented himself as a grieving widower, expressing shock and sorrow over Julie's untimely death. He denied any involvement, even speculating that she might have accidentally or intentionally ingested antifreeze during a moment of depression brought on by her health struggles, their move to Boston, and their inability to conceive. However, not everyone believed his claims. The nurse who initially suggested the toxicology screening later reported that James's behavior during Julie's hospital stay had been unsettling. He often dominated conversations with doctors, frequently answering questions on Julie's behalf and giving the impression that he was controlling her care. Some people argued James's actions were likely a result of Julie's illness. Perhaps he was simply trying to advocate for her when she couldn't speak for herself. However, others found his behavior suspicious. At one point, James even suggested a peculiar theory, claiming that Julie might have mistakenly consumed antifreeze, believing it to be a different liquid. Investigators became more suspicious upon learning that Julie had a $250,000 life insurance policy. At first glance, this might not seem like a strong motive for her husband, James, who seemed to live a comfortable life. However, doubts began to arise. Was James as wealthy as he appeared, or was his wealth just an illusion? Shortly after Julie's death, a new clue came to light. The landlord of James and Julie's Boston apartment contacted the authorities after James suddenly disappeared, leaving the apartment and abandoning personal belongings such as Julie's wedding dress, their wedding rings, and photos from their wedding. Items a grieving husband would typically treasure. It was soon revealed that James had returned to Missouri, where he began a new job as a talk show host at a local radio station, seemingly eager to start afresh. Investigators uncovered troubling details about James's life in Boston. He hadn't paid rent for months, his luxury car had been repossessed, and, shockingly, he had forged a letter claiming he had been accepted into Harvard Business School, a lie he used to justify working remotely for a marketing company. This company had hired him for a high-paying project to design a website, but he failed to deliver results and appeared to lack the necessary skills for the job. Instead, he embezzled funds allocated for the project. His resume was filled with fabricated job experiences, including positions at companies where he had never worked. Even Julie, his wife, was unaware of the full extent of his deceit. Despite pretending to go to work, buying new furniture, and maintaining a luxurious lifestyle, James's financial troubles deepened. He had no stable income. His utilities were about to be cut off, and he was drowning in debt. At some point, Julie's life insurance policy became a potential solution to James's mounting financial problems. Back in Missouri, James shared inconsistent stories about Julie's death with his new acquaintances. Some say she died of a mysterious illness. Others say she harmed herself. When asked what he planned to do with the insurance money, he casually remarked that he would buy a BMW. He also mentioned dating someone new and wanting to start a family. As suspicion grew, investigators turned their attention to James. Although his behavior raised numerous red flags, the evidence against him remained circumstantial. Friends recalled James confidently boasting that he couldn't be convicted because there was no direct proof. Oddly, however, he never explicitly denied involvement in Julie's death. Investigators conducted thorough searches of his Boston apartment, his family's property, and his home in Missouri, but nothing incriminating was found until they examined his computer. Despite his attempts to wipe his hard drive clean, forensic experts recovered disturbing internet searches, such as how to get rid of someone and antifreeze poisoning. These searches aligned with Julie's toxicology results. Investigators also discovered that James had encouraged Julie to drink Gatorade weeks before her death, claiming it was good for her health. Toxicology tests would later reveal that she had been poisoned with ethylene glycol, the main ingredient in antifreeze, over an extended period, explaining the mysterious illness she suffered before her death. Based on this evidence, prosecutors began building their case. In 2005, James was arrested, and his trial began in 2008. Although much of the evidence was circumstantial, it painted a consistent and damning picture of James, his financial ruin, fraudulent lifestyle, and the timing of Julie's poisoning all pointed to him. Many who had once admired James were shocked to learn the extent of his lies, though some described him as a loving husband and found it difficult to believe he could commit such a calculated crime. The defense argued that Julie may have deliberately or accidentally ingested the antifreeze herself, citing her emotional struggles with poor health and infertility. They also questioned the reliability of the toxicology reports, suggesting there was no concrete evidence that James had administered the poison. Despite their efforts to cast doubt the search history, James's encouragement for Julie to drink Gatorade, the life insurance motive, and his pattern of deceit proved overwhelming for the jury. Although no physical container of antifreeze was found, the evidence revealed Julie had been gradually poisoned. In her final weeks, she had confided in friends that James had been attentive and had repeatedly urged her to drink Gatorade, despite her dislike of it. What is most suspicious is that after Julie passed away, James rushed to claim the insurance money and quickly moved on with his life, making his behavior even more suspicious. In 2008, James Keown was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court concluded that he had deliberately and methodically poisoned his wife by spiking her drinks with ethylene glycol, ultimately causing her death. To this day, James continues to maintain his innocence. However, Julie's family firmly believes that justice was appropriately served. In 2017, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court upheld his conviction, stating that the evidence against him was overwhelming. Julie Keown, remembered as a compassionate nurse, a devoted wife, and a loving daughter, was tragically taken from the world far too soon. Her kindness, sincerity, and grace live on in the memories of those who knew her and in the relentless pursuit of truth that arose following her untimely passing. Caitlin Coons first met Jonathan Jones when she was only 15 years old, and he was 30. Their relationship would soon spiral into something deeply troubling. Caitlin, who had spent much of her young life in Ohio's foster care system, she was living in a group home in Canton when she first encountered Jonathan. She had faced numerous challenges throughout her childhood, bouncing between foster families and care facilities, she desperately seeking stability and someone who would truly care for her. Like many children in state custody, she had experienced multiple placements, each bringing its own disappointments. These constant moves had left her feeling abandoned, creating deep emotional wounds that made her vulnerable. Caitlin couldn't help but hope that each new placement would provide the loving, stable environment she craved, but these hopes were repeatedly dashed. Jonathan, 15 years her senior, seemed to offer the attention and affection that Caitlin had been searching for. However, their relationship was far from appropriate or legal. At 30, Jonathan was a grown man who should have known better than to pursue a romantic relationship with a 15-year-old girl. Caitlin couldn't help but be drawn to someone who appeared to understand her struggles and offered her the emotional connection she had been craving. What she didn't realize was that she was becoming involved with a predatory man who would ultimately lead her down a dark and destructive path. As their relationship developed, it became increasingly clear that Jonathan was taking advantage of Caitlin's vulnerable state. Caitlin's unstable past made her emotionally vulnerable, and she became dependent on Jonathan, who took advantage of her youth and desire for love. Jonathan manipulated Caitlin by exploiting her weaknesses. He told her she was mature, different, and their relationship was special. These tactics are commonly used by predators to make victims feel responsible for their own exploitation. Jonathan had complete control, and Caitlin became isolated, making it difficult for her to see that she was being manipulated and believe their relationship was genuine. Even though there were clear warning signs, her longing for love and inexperience with healthy relationships blinded her to the fact that she was being victimized. She saw Jonathan as her rescuer, the one finally giving her the love she desired. In March 2023, Jonathan's predatory behavior was exposed when he was convicted of enticing a child to view adult material and child endangerment. The court found that he had engaged in intimate with 15-year-old Caitlin and planned to sell photographs of their encounters. This revealed the extent of his exploitation and abuse. After the conviction, the court had ordered him to stay away from Caitlin and put a GPS tracker on him to monitor his location. Despite these efforts, tragedy was unavoidable. Nicole Jones, Jonathan's 53-year-old mother, lived in Sylvania Township. She was very worried about her son's relationship with the teenage girl, Caitlin. She was concerned about Jonathan's legal problems and the negative impact the relationship was having on both of them. As a caring mother, Nicole had seen her adult son making increasingly bad choices. She had tried to support him, but his relationship with a teenager and the resulting legal issues were almost too much to bear. Nicole felt stuck between her love for her son and her duty to protect a vulnerable young girl. The seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences of Jonathan's actions made her even more anxious. As a mother, Nicole had always tried to see the best in Jonathan, even when his behavior was clearly problematic. However, his relationship with Caitlin represented a new level of concern. The teenage girl was undeniably vulnerable and traumatized, and Jonathan appeared to be exploiting someone who needed protection. Nicole felt a sense of responsibility, not only for her son's actions, but also for Caitlin's welfare. She had repeatedly talked to Jonathan about the inappropriate nature of his relationship, pointing out the age difference and legal ramifications. She remained steadfast in her belief that Jonathan needed to end the relationship and seek help for the issues driving him to pursue someone so young and vulnerable. In April 2023, despite the court order, Caitlin made the fateful decision to leave her foster care placement in Canton. The 17-year-old girl, still deeply attached to Jonathan, couldn't resist what she believed was love. She met Jonathan at a local restaurant, and together they returned to his mother's home in Sylvania Township. Caitlin hoped this reunion would somehow make everything better, that they could find a way to be together without further problems. Nicole didn't know that Caitlin was secretly living in her house. Caitlin had climbed in through Jonathan's bedroom window and was hiding from Nicole. This created a stressful and difficult situation, as Caitlin was living a secret life in Nicole's home, where Nicole was trying to live normally. This situation put a strain on everyone. Nicole was unaware of everything happening in her own home, and it was becoming harder to keep Caitlin hidden. Caitlin had to stay quiet during the day and avoid being seen. Caitlin grew frustrated with the secrecy and the constant fear of being discovered, and she realized that this situation couldn't last. As days passed, the strain of keeping Caitlin's presence hidden became increasingly difficult. Jonathan knew it was only a matter of time before his mother discovered Caitlin's presence, and he knew his mother would not approve. It was evident that Nicole was genuinely concerned about both Jonathan's welfare and Caitlin's. However, her attempts to intervene and protect them would ultimately put her in grave danger. The tension in the household reached a breaking point when Caitlin became convinced that Nicole was the primary obstacle to her being with Jonathan. Warped by trauma and manipulation, Caitlin was unable to see that Nicole's concerns were legitimate and protective. Instead, she viewed Nicole as an enemy, deliberately trying to destroy her relationship. This perception fueled increasingly dark thoughts about how to eliminate the perceived obstacle. On April 19, 2023, Caitlin's frustration and desperation reached a dangerous crescendo. She made a decision that would forever change multiple lives. Caitlin gave Jonathan an ultimatum that was both shocking and terrifying in its cold calculation. Jonathan had 5 hours to kill his own mother, Nicole, or she would end their relationship forever. This demand was so extreme and disturbing that it revealed the depth of Caitlin's psychological disturbance and the toxic nature of their relationship. Jonathan, faced with this impossible choice, found himself paralyzed by fear and indecision. Although he had made numerous poor choices in his life, including his predatory relationship with Caitlin, the prospect of murdering his own mother was apparently beyond even his moral boundaries. As the 5-hour deadline approached, Jonathan could not bring himself to harm the woman who had given him life and had tried to help him throughout his struggles. Caitlin wanted Jonathan to kill Nicole. When he refused, she gave him an extra hour, hoping he would change his mind. But Jonathan still didn't act. So, Caitlin decided she would kill Nicole herself. She believed that for her relationship with Jonathan to work, Nicole had to die. Despite feeling troubled and pressured, she resolved to commit the murder since Jonathan wouldn't. On the evening of April 19, 2023, Nicole Jones stood in her kitchen, facing her refrigerator. Unbeknownst to her, Caitlin was outside and had found a large rock. Caitlin brought the rock inside, intending to use it as a weapon. Nicole continued her usual evening routine, completely unaware that Caitlin was about to end her life in a shocking and violent way. Her kitchen, normally a place of comfort, was about to become the scene of a brutal crime. As Nicole stood with her back turned, focused on whatever she was retrieving from the refrigerator, Caitlin approached from behind with the rock in her hands. In a moment of pure evil and violence, Caitlin began bludgeoning Nicole over the head with the rock, striking her multiple times with brutal force. The attack was swift and merciless, giving Nicole no opportunity to defend herself or even understand what was happening. As if the bludgeoning wasn't enough to ensure Nicole's death, Caitlin then strangled her, making certain that she would never again interfere in her relationship with Jonathan. Jonathan was in the living room when his girlfriend, Caitlin, murdered his mother in the kitchen. Instead of calling for help or trying to save her, Jonathan chose to help Caitlin hide the crime. This decision made him an accomplice in a shocking murder case. They worked together to dispose of Nicole's body. They drove to 2 local stores, purchasing a tarp and garbage bags to wrap Nicole's lifeless body. They returned to the house and wrapped Nicole's body in the materials they had purchased. After wrapping the body, Jonathan and Caitlin loaded Nicole into the trunk. In perhaps one of the most disturbing details of this case, prosecutors later revealed that Jonathan and Caitlin actually went out to dinner while Nicole's body remained in the trunk. Following their dinner, they drove to a nearby apartment complex and disposed of Nicole's body in a dumpster, treating her as mere garbage to be discarded. The dumpster was collected the following day as part of the normal garbage pickup, and Nicole's body was taken to a landfill. Even though law enforcement searched thoroughly, Nicole's body was never found. This prevents her family from having the closure they would get from a proper burial. With Nicole's body disposed of, Jonathan and Caitlin decided to flee the area to avoid prosecution. They took Nicole's 2021 Buick Encore and began driving west, eventually crossing the border into Mexico. Along with the car, they also took Nicole's social security card, identification, credit cards, and health insurance card, essentially stealing her identity along with her life. However, their escape was short-lived. Caitlin, perhaps overwhelmed by the magnitude of her actions, made a critical error that would lead to their capture. While on the run, she contacted one of her caregivers and confessed to the murder, admitting that she had killed Jonathan's mother. This confession prompted the caregiver to immediately contact law enforcement, who began working with U.S. Marshals to track down Jonathan and Caitlin. The search for Jonathan and Caitlin became an international manhunt, with law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border cooperating to locate them. Fortunately for investigators, Jonathan was still wearing the Jeep's tracking device, mandated as part of his earlier conviction. This device allowed authorities to track their movements and ultimately locate them in the municipality of Ahumada, in the state of Chihuahua, Mexico, on May 8, 2023, approximately 3 weeks after Nicole's murder. U.S. Marshals and Mexican authorities successfully apprehended both Jonathan and Caitlin. They were found in possession of Nicole's vehicle and personal documents, providing further evidence of their guilt. Jonathan and Caitlin was extradited back to the United States to face charges for their roles in Nicole's brutal murder. Before, back in Ohio, law enforcement had been conducting a thorough investigation into Nicole's disappearance and presumed death. The investigation had begun on May 5, 2023, when Canton Police contacted Sylvania Township Police requesting a welfare check on Nicole Jones. When officers arrived at her condominium, they were unable to locate her despite conducting a thorough search of the premises. As the investigation unfolded, the true horror of what had transpired became clear. Detective Jake Albright of the Sylvania Township Police Department interviewed Caitlin extensively after her arrest, and she provided detailed confessions about how she had murdered Nicole. The case against both Caitlin and Jonathan was overwhelming. In addition to Caitlin's confessions, investigators had Jeep's tracking data from Jonathan's ankle monitor that corroborated the timeline of events and their movements after the murder. Surveillance footage from the stores where they purchased supplies further supported the prosecution's case against them. Initially, prosecutors charged Caitlin with aggravated murder, abuse of a corpse, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. Given the serious nature of the charges and the calculated manner in which the crime was committed, the court decided to charge Caitlin as an adult. Despite her being only 17 at the time of the murder, Jonathan faced even more charges, including 2 counts of aggravated murder, felonious assault, aggravated burglary, aggravated robbery, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. However, as the case moved through the legal system, both defendants ultimately decided to accept plea agreements rather than face trial. On June 4, 2024, both Caitlin Coons, now 18, and Jonathan Jones, 33, appeared in Lucas County Common Police Court before judge. They each pleaded no contest to charges of aggravated murder and abuse of a corpse. As part of the plea agreement, prosecutors agreed to dismiss the remaining charges against both defendants. The judge sentenced each of them to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. While this sentence ensures that both will spend decades behind bars, it also means that they could potentially be released while still relatively young, a thought that brings little comfort to Nicole's grieving family. During the sentencing hearing, the impact of Nicole's murder on her family became painfully clear. Nicole's brother, Robert Jones, who is the administrator of her estate, spoke about the devastating effect her loss has had on their family. Lucas County Prosecutor Julia Bates addressed the case following the sentencing, acknowledging the horror of what had transpired and expressing hope that the resolution would bring some measure of peace to Nicole's family. She said, "This was a horrific event." In her statement, they are relieved to reach a resolution in this case. They hope this brings some measure of peace to Nicole Jones's family. May her memory forever live in their hearts. As a result of this case, Robert Jones, representing Nicole's estate, has filed a civil lawsuit against Caitlin and Jonathan for wrongful death. The lawsuit seeks $25,000 in damages, in addition to punitive damages and other expenses. The suit acknowledges that no amount of money can truly make up for Nicole's death and the way it occurred. A tragic part of this case is that Nicole's body has never been found. Her family has been deprived of the fundamental right to give her a proper burial and have a place to remember and honor her. Not knowing where Nicole's remains are located intensifies their suffering. This case serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can result from predatory relationships and the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Caitlin, who began as a victim of Jonathan's inappropriate pursuit when she was just 15, ultimately became a perpetrator of one of the most brutal murders imaginable. While this transformation does not excuse her actions, it highlights the complex dynamics that can develop when adults prey upon children who are already struggling with trauma and instability. The residents of Sylvania Township, especially those in Nicole's condominium complex, were deeply disturbed by the terrible crime. Many residents are elderly and had moved there because they thought it was a safe and peaceful place to live. The shocking murder of their neighbor by her son and his teenage girlfriend destroyed their feeling of safety and showed that violence can happen anywhere, even in quiet communities. As this case comes to a close with the sentencing of both perpetrators, Nicole Jones's family continues to struggle with their immense loss. It was evident to everyone that Nicole Jones was a caring mother who had tried to protect both her son and the teenage girl her son was exploiting. Her concern for their welfare ultimately cost her life as she became the victim of a crime so brutal and senseless that it continues to shock all who learn about it. Harold entered the house with a friendly smile, listened to concerns, provided an injection, and then left. A few hours later, the patient would die. No one imagined that this calm, tidy doctor wearing glasses was secretly waging a personal war against life. He appeared trustworthy, a caring figure, and a support for the elderly in a British suburb. However, he was actually the deadliest serial killer in British history, using his medical profession as a cover for the cold-blooded murder of hundreds of innocent people. Harold Frederick Shipman was born on January 14, 1946, in a working-class neighborhood of Nottingham. His family represented the typical post-war British household. His father was a truck dispatcher, and his mother was a homemaker. However, it was his mother, Vera Shipman, who greatly influenced his life. She was strict and intensely religious, and Harold was her favorite child, receiving much more attention than his siblings. This close relationship with his mother significantly shaped his personality, fostering his need for control and a sense of being special. When Harold turned 17, his mother became seriously ill with lung cancer. He watched her health decline day by day. Harold was by her side, helping out by bringing food, running errands, and holding her hand. He witnessed a once strong, commanding woman become a frail version of herself. One particular moment stayed with him, when the doctor gave his mother a morphine injection. Within minutes, she fell asleep, never woke up. That image stuck in Harold's mind. The doctor, with just one injection, ended her suffering, held complete control over her life. Harold began to associate medicine and morphine with a dangerous kind of power. Death of his mother marked a crucial change in Harold's life. The next year, he started medical school in Leeds. Although he was intelligent, hard-working, he was also shy and chose not to socialize much. His motivation for studying medicine was not driven by a love for biology or a desire to help others. Instead, he sought a profession where he could manage pain, death, and control over lives, a field where people would admire him, much like how his mother admired her doctor. In 1970, he graduated and obtained his medical license. He was young, polite, reserved, and highly disciplined. This was the Harold Shipman who appeared at clinics and hospitals. He wore glasses, maintained a neat appearance, spoke to patients in a calm yet confident manner. While many of his colleagues viewed him as unexciting but dependable, inside him, a troubling idea was developing, one that would eventually turn into a dangerous obsession. Early in his career, he worked at Pontefract General Infirmary and later at a hospital in Todmorden. It was at this location that his troubling behavior first appeared. He was discovered forging prescriptions for morphine, and with an unusually large supply of painkillers, much more than would be required for a large ward. As a result, he was arrested, confessed to his crimes, and received a suspended sentence. Despite this, he continued to practice medicine. The system allowed him a second chance, which he exploited to carry out a series of heinous acts in secret. After receiving a suspended sentence for forging prescriptions, Harold was eager to make a fresh start. In 1977, he relocated to Hyde, a small town in Greater Manchester, where he joined the Donnybrook medical practice. There, he began to shape himself into the ideal family doctor, one who patients could rely on for all aspects of their health, including pain management and end-of-life care. Patients adored Dr. Shipman. He was always polite, attentive, and respectful of their time. Elderly women in particular felt a strong connection to him. He listened carefully, didn't rush them, and never pressured them into unnecessary treatments. He made it a point to visit patients at their homes, especially those unable to travel to the clinic. These home visits became a hallmark of his practice. He would arrive, administer an injection, and then be on his way. Shortly after his visits, however, many of these patients would pass away. To the police and death registrars, he seemed like an ideal doctor. He completed death certificates himself, citing causes such as old age or heart failure, and frequently sent bodies to the crematorium without conducting autopsies. His reputation was so strong that no one doubted his records. If he declared a death to be natural, it was accepted without hesitation. People failed to notice that the death rate among his patients was significantly higher than that of his peers in the region. If they did notice, they attributed it to coincidence or characteristics of his patient group. He was punctual, detail-oriented, and excessively meticulous. He lived with his wife, Primrose, and their 4 children, following a rigid daily schedule similar to a military routine. Each night, he recorded new cases of death in his medical logs. There was no emotion involved. Everything was exact and clinical, resembling an accounting report. His method of killing was straightforward. He would visit elderly patients, primarily those living alone, and administer an intravenous injection. Most of the time, this involved a lethal dose of morphine or another potent opioid delivered quickly. The patient would lose consciousness and die within 15 minutes. Shipman would then calmly conclude his visit, leave the house, and fill out the necessary paperwork. Time of death, symptoms, no witnesses. Everything was meticulously managed. His actions lacked rage or chaos. They resembled a ritual. He didn't merely kill, he carefully orchestrated each event. He determined who would live and who would die. This might have been his warped way of dealing with his mother's death, possibly viewing himself as a savior from pain. Later, psychologists suggested that he felt a sense of godlike power from it. He took on the roles of judge and executioner. Over time, he became so confident that he stopped concealing his unusual actions. Sometimes, patients died one after another in the same day, all attended by the same doctor, with the same natural cause, and no one suspected anything. Starting in the late 1980s, the death rate among Harold Shipman's elderly patients began to increase, but no one recognized the serious pattern. The victims were primarily women, over 70, often widows who lived alone, but they were not always weak. Most were still vibrant and active. They died suddenly, without apparent suffering or signs of struggle. He was never rushed. He would visit a patient's home, administer an injection, wait a bit while observing their breathing slow, and only then would he look into their lifeless eyes, stand up, remove his gloves, adjust his tie, and leave. Relatives would learn of the death afterward, and when they received the medical report indicating a natural cause, there was no reason or legal basis to call for an investigation. Even in a well-designed system, problems can arise. In 1993, colleagues started to suspect that the number of deaths among patients under Shipman's care was unusually high, especially since he had seen many of them just hours before they died. An internal investigation was launched, but because Shipman was a meticulous doctor with all his paperwork in perfect order, and there was no national database to compare mortality rates between doctors at that time, the investigation was closed. Shipman realized he could act without fear of consequences and became more brazen. He not only killed patients, but also began forging their wills. In several cases, he either persuaded elderly women to change their wills in his favor or forged them himself. His aim was straightforward. He wanted their inheritances. In one instance, he misled a patient into thinking he was helping her with medical forms, while in reality, he gave her documents that transferred her property to him. By 1998, over 200 patients had died, yet the system remained oblivious. He was still seen as trustworthy. Bureaucracy failed to connect the evidence, and families found it hard to believe that their beloved doctor could be a monster. The situation changed dramatically after the death of Kathleen Grundy, 81, a vibrant widow who was engaged in her community. She was energetic and preparing for a trip with her daughter when she unexpectedly passed away at home. Just one day after Dr. Shipman's visit, what should have been a routine case turned into a serious error for him, leading to his ultimate downfall. On June 24, 1998, Kathleen unexpectedly passed away at home after a visit from her doctor, Harold Shipman. She had been feeling well, just returned from shopping, was planning a trip with her daughter, and was getting ready to celebrate her wedding anniversary. However, a few hours after the doctor's visit, she stopped responding to phone calls. Neighbors eventually discovered her body slumped in an armchair, holding a book. It appeared she had just fallen asleep. Harold Shipman wasted no time filling out her death certificate, attributing her death to old age and a heart condition. No autopsy was conducted because her family trusted the doctor, and the system relied on his professional judgment. Everything seemed ideal, except for one critical issue. Kathleen had a daughter named Angela Woodruff, who was skeptical of coincidences. Angela, being a lawyer, was familiar with how a properly drafted will should appear. When she received a copy of her mother's last will, she was shocked. The document stated that Kathleen left her entire estate, valued at over £300,000, not to her daughter or grandchildren, but to Dr. Harold Shipman. Moreover, the will lacked a date, any witness signatures, and Kathleen's signature appeared strange, as if it had been copied. Angela was determined to get to the bottom of things. She first asked the notary if he had ever managed Kathleen's affairs. He answered that he had never created a will for him and mentioned that he had an official copy of Kathleen's will, which had been prepared years prior. This original will clearly divided her estate among her family, directly contradicting the new will. Angela then approached the police, which marked the beginning of the unraveling of Harold Shipman's mistakes. He believed that no one would challenge him, that no detective would investigate further, and that he was beyond reach. However, the inspectors decided to open an investigation. The first issue noticed was that Kathleen's death certificate was filled out incorrectly. Next, there were inconsistencies in her medical records. While the doctor reported heart problems, her family insisted she had shown no symptoms. Additionally, the pharmacy where Shipman allegedly ordered her medications confirmed that there were no prescriptions under her name. This led the police to request an exhumation of her body. During the investigation, experts discovered high levels of diamorphine, a type of medical morphine usually prescribed for extreme pain in hospice patients, in Kathleen's tissues. However, she did not have any condition that would require such medication. The amount of morphine found was enough to be lethal for someone of her age and size. Experts determined that Kathleen Grundy's will was forged by comparing her signature on the new document to her signatures on older ones. They concluded she did not write it, and her computer showed no evidence of changes to the will. All signs indicated that Dr. Shipman had forged the document to steal money from a deceased woman. The combination of one deceased woman, her daughter, and the forged will revealed a dark and deadly chapter in British medical history. Following the alarming toxicology findings, the Manchester police recognized that this was not a one-time incident. They started to examine all the death certificates that Dr. Harold Shipman had signed over the years. As their investigation progressed, they became increasingly disturbed. They began to uncover a network of deaths connected to one individual, the esteemed Dr. Harold Shipman. The forensic team carefully examined the medical records of over 500 patients who had died after being treated by Dr. Shipman. They focused especially on elderly women who passed away at home and were cremated without autopsies. They paid close attention to cases where Dr. Shipman was the last person to see the patient alive, wrote the death certificate, and discouraged family members from requesting autopsies. These cases were quite common. To verify their suspicions, the police exhumed several bodies. In each case, tests found high levels of diamorphine and pure morphine at dangerously high doses. This was Shipman's method. He used this drug to make deaths appear natural. He could administer it during a home visit and later list the cause of death as a heart attack, respiratory failure, or general decline in health. Investigators were shocked by the extent of the situation. Almost every case appeared suspicious. In some areas where Shipman worked, more patients died in just a few years than in the entire rest of the city combined. None had reported a sudden decline in health before he arrived. Shipman specifically targeted patients who lived alone to eliminate witnesses. Another disturbing fact came to light. Harold Shipman kept killing until the day before his arrest. Even while the investigation was happening, he still visited patients, examined them, smiled, gave injections, and recorded deaths, despite the exhumation of Kathleen Grundy's body. As the case evolved, the police had to enlist more than a dozen forensic experts, toxicologists, criminologists, and psychologists to understand his motives, but nothing logical emerged. Shipman gained little from most of the murders, with only a few instances where he forged wills. Most of his victims left him nothing. Psychologists proposed that Shipman exhibited traits of both addiction and megalomania. He assumed the role of God, determining who should die and turning death into a routine act of murder. When the number of victims reached 215, the British media reacted with disbelief. It was shocking to discover that a well-respected family doctor, who was a father of 4 and had spent decades serving his community, turned out to be a cold-blooded serial killer. He may be the deadliest killer in British history, and possibly even in human history. The trial of Harold Shipman started on October 5, 1999, at Preston Crown Court, known for being one of the most secure buildings in England. The case attracted widespread media attention, with journalists from around the world covering the hearings daily, while families of the victims filled the courtroom. Sitting in the defendant's chair was an elderly man who appeared calm, with grey hair and a cold expression. He looked just like he did during his numerous visits to patients, composed, reserved, and confident. However, this time, he was not facing an elderly patient, but an entire nation. The prosecution charged him with 15 murder counts, supported by strong evidence, including exhumations, toxicology reports, forged wills, and inconsistencies in medical records. Yet, it was widely believed that this represented only a fraction of his crimes, with investigators estimating that the real number of victims exceeded 200. It was impossible to prove each murder with absolute certainty because many bodies had been cremated and there was insufficient evidence remaining. During the court proceedings, prosecutors listed the names of the women who had passed away in their sleep, found in various locations like next to a couch, in the kitchen, and in a rocking chair. The relatives of the victims were visibly upset and crying, while Shipman remained expressionless throughout the reading, showing no signs of remorse or emotion. A pivotal moment in the investigation was the case of Kathleen Grundy. Evidence was presented in court showing that her will had been forged, which included handwriting analysis and testimonies from her daughter, pharmacists, and neighbors. Another tragic incident involved 59-year-old Jean Lilly. Her grandson shared that, on the morning of her death, she was baking an apple pie for him. Just 2 hours later, the doctor called to inform him of her passing, claiming she had died peacefully of old age. However, tests later revealed that she had actually died from a morphine overdose administered by Shipman. He had contacted the funeral service himself and insisted on her immediate cremation. Psychiatrists involved in the case attempted to analyze his behavior. One described Shipman as a pathological narcissist who believed he was all-powerful. The defense attempted to question the exhumation methods and toxicology reports, but the evidence against Dr. Shipman was substantial. Numerous witnesses, including former colleagues, nurses, and victims' relatives, provided testimony. They all shared a consistent view. Dr. Shipman appeared to be perfect, and no one suspected that a monster was hidden behind his calm demeanor. On January 31, 2000, after 6 months of hearings, the jury found Harold Shipman guilty of all 15 murder charges and 1 count of forging a will. The judge sentenced him to 15 life sentences without the possibility of parole, a symbolic punishment since it was widely believed that he could have killed as many as more than 200 people. This verdict addressed not only Shipman, but also the system that allowed him to cause destruction for decades. The courtroom erupted in applause and tears. Even at the end of the trial, Harold remained upright and expressionless, almost as if the trial did not concern him. He did not apologize, provide explanations, or display any emotion. To many, he was seen not as a human being, but as a heartless machine of death. After the verdict, Harold Shipman was sent to Wakefield Prison, one of the UK's most secure facilities, known for housing the most dangerous criminals. He was monitored around the clock, but maintained the same demeanor in his cell as he had outside, withdrawn, silent, and detached. He avoided interactions, declined rehabilitation programs, refused to give interviews, and completely evaded questions about his crimes. He understood that he would be remembered in history. His name would forever be associated with a staggering number, 215-250, or perhaps even more figures that designated him as the deadliest serial killer in recorded history. He did not want his story to conclude on anyone else's terms. On January 13, 2004, the day before he turned 58, Harold Shipman was discovered dead in his cell. He had hanged himself using a bedsheet tied to the window bars. Unfortunately, no one was able to stop him. He exited life as he had taken it, quietly, without saying a word or providing any explanation. He left no suicide note, confession, or reasons. All that remained was silence. Before the summer of 1988, the Carr family enjoyed a happy life in the small town of Alturas. They were known for their strong faith and attended church every Sunday, embodying a peaceful, trouble-free family. However, their calm life was disrupted on June 14th when 17-year-old Dwayne found a threatening letter in their mailbox. The anonymous note was alarming, warning the family to leave Florida or face serious consequences. Distressed, Dwayne quickly showed the letter to his parents. His mother, Peggy, was filled with fear, while his father, Pi, dismissed it as a prank. As summer transitioned into fall, the family's anxiety increased, peaking on October 23rd when Peggy suddenly became seriously ill. She suffered from intense nausea and severe pain, and strikingly, her hair began to fall out in large clumps. Despite her worsening condition, Pi insisted on not taking Peggy to the hospital, thinking it was just a temporary illness. However, Peggy's health rapidly deteriorated, and within a week, she fell into a coma. To make matters worse, Dwayne started showing the same troubling symptoms as his mother. This alarming situation led to a police investigation. On December 2nd, authorities made a shocking discovery. The sickness affecting the Carr family was caused by thallium, a deadly chemical often used in rat poison. Tests revealed that every family member, including Pi, had dangerously high levels of this poison in their bodies. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that someone was deliberately targeting the Carr family. The letter they received was not a joke. It was a warning of the danger ahead. Authorities now had to work quickly to identify the person responsible and prevent further harm. Turn back time. In 1988, Dwayne was happily living with his family in the peaceful town of Alturas, Florida. His mother, Peggy, worked hard as a waitress at a local diner. After raising 3 children by herself, she found love with Pi Carr, who had 2 children of his own, creating a blended family. Life in Alturas seemed perfect. It was a quiet place where people left their doors unlocked, ideal for raising a family. However, on October 23rd, everything changed in a tragic way. Early in the morning, Peggy went to work as usual. However, shortly after arriving at the diner, she began experiencing a burning sensation in her legs and feet, followed by severe chest pain. She was quickly taken to the hospital, where her condition left her nearly incapacitated. Despite extensive tests, doctors were unable to determine the cause of her symptoms and sent her home with pain relief medication. A week later, on October 30th, Peggy and Dwayne, along with Dwayne's stepbrother, Travis, were taken to the hospital with severe symptoms. The pain was so intense that they were brought to tears, and they were scared for their lives. Peggy was admitted to the intensive care unit, where an infectious disease specialist noticed something troubling, suggesting possible poisoning. He decided to test for thallium, a toxic substance banned in the U.S. since 1972, but still found in some old rat poisons. The test results were shocking. Peggy had 50 times the deadly amount of thallium in her body. The following day, October 31st, she fell into a coma. Travis needed a respirator, and Dwayne showed no signs of getting better. The police quickly started an investigation with a clear goal: to identify the source of the poisoning and prevent more harm. They searched the orange groves, tested the neighborhood's water supply, and even investigated the diner where Peggy worked, but found no signs of thallium. As news broke, panic spread through the community. Concerned citizens demanded answers, anxious about their safety. Investigators arrived at the Carr home, carefully collecting dust samples and over 400 household items for testing. One item of particular concern was a 6-pack of Coke bottles, 3 of which were unopened. Tests showed that each bottle contained more than a gram of thallium, enough to be lethal to an adult. The lead detective understood that there were 2 possible explanations. Either the Coke had been tampered with at the factory, or it had been contaminated elsewhere. If it was factory tampering, many more people might have consumed the poison, potentially affecting not just the county, but the entire state or even the nation. This fear led locals to hesitate before drinking Coke. The investigation initially targeted the bottling company. However, thanks to Coca-Cola's cooperation, it was quickly determined that large-scale tampering was not possible. It was found that tampering with the product at the plant could not physically happen. As a result, the police concluded that this was a deliberate attack on Peggy Carr and her family. The investigation focused on family members, with Peggy's husband, Pi Carr, becoming a key suspect. Although they had been married for just 7 months, their initial happiness had faded quickly. Pi spent long hours working at the mine, which made Peggy increasingly suspicious of him. One night, she caught him with another woman, further deepening her concerns. During the weekend that Peggy became ill, Pi happened to be out of town. When he returned, he was reluctant to take her to the hospital. As investigators looked further into Pi's past, they tried to find a reason why he would poison his wife. However, one question continued to trouble the police. Why would Pi also poison his own son, Travis? During the interrogation, Pi shared an intriguing piece of information. On June 14th, 4 months before Peggy got sick, Dwayne discovered a letter in the mailbox. Inside, there was a yellow post-it note with a typewritten warning telling the family to leave Florida within 2 weeks or they would face death. At first, Dwayne and his siblings found it funny, but now Pi's lack of concern appeared more suspicious. The police discovered that unsettling events had previously occurred in the Carr household. A few years earlier, 2 of their dogs had died unexpectedly, showing signs of severe illness and hair loss. This raised a disturbing possibility that they might have been subjected to experimentation. As Peggy's condition worsened, Dwayne and Travis showed no signs of getting better. The entire family was tested for thallium. The results were shocking. Every family member, including Pi Carr, had trace amounts of thallium in their system. This finding ruled Pi out as a suspect, since it seemed unlikely that someone would commit such a crime while also risking their own exposure to the poison. Even Peggy's 2-year-old granddaughter, Casey, had traces of thallium. On March 3, 1989, after 5 months of suffering, Peggy's health took a tragic turn for the worse. Dwayne was summoned to her bedside one last time as the family made the painful decision to take her off life support. Peggy Carr passed away at the age of 41, leaving her family in deep sorrow. Peggy's death shifted the investigation to a murder case. Poisoning is an unusual and deliberate method of killing, typically associated with a particularly clever and disturbed individual. When the FBI examined the contaminated Coke bottles, they discovered tiny scratch marks, suggesting that the bottles had been carefully altered. Thallium had been added, the caps resealed, and the bottles looked untouched. Since thallium is both tasteless and odorless, it dissolves easily without leaving typical signs like overflow, discoloration, or sediment in soda. The careful mixture found in the Coke bottles indicates that the perpetrator possessed advanced chemistry knowledge, an exceptionally intelligent person who thought they were more cunning than everyone else. Police began to interview neighbors and townspeople in Alturas, a small community with only a few hundred residents, as they searched for the person responsible for this terrible crime. The closest neighbors to the Carr family were George James Trepal and his wife, Diana. When detectives questioned Trepal, he reacted with surprising anger, criticizing the redneck children and family living nearby. When asked who anyone would want to harm the Carr family, George gave a disturbingly detailed answer. He believed someone wanted them to move away. This was exactly the same message found in a threatening letter sent to the Carrs, a detail known only to the police. This unusual response led investigators to consider Trepal as a prime suspect. Further investigation revealed that George was a self-taught chemist, while his wife, Diana, held a master's degree in chemistry. Both were part of an elite society for individuals with an IQ in the top 2% of the population. Investigators then uncovered George's criminal history. He had previously served time in prison for his role as the chemist in a large methamphetamine operation. One key ingredient used in making methamphetamine is thallium. The news that George was a person of interest surprised even Peggy's son, Dwayne. who found it hard to believe that Treppel was capable of such a terrible crime. The detectives found out that Treppel had a prior altercation with the Carr family over loud music. Just 2 days after this dispute, Peggy Carr was poisoned. Although there were connections between the two events, the police did not have sufficient evidence to arrest Treppel. Typically, police procedures involve questioning a suspect in hopes of securing a confession. However, detectives felt this tactic would not be effective with Treppel, who is introverted and avoids confrontation. Therefore, the FBI suggested an alternative approach. Someone needed to go undercover to outwit Treppel. The police assigned Special Agent to go undercover in the group that George Treppel was part of. The goal was to earn Treppel's trust and collect enough evidence to demonstrate his involvement in the poisoning. At first, it appeared that the agent would only need to work undercover for a weekend. However, she was cautioned about Treppel's exceptional memory. If he saw her, he might remember her face or car. She, using a fake identity, was getting ready to attend a murder mystery event organized by George Treppel and his wife, Diana. She pretended to be a woman about to divorce her abusive husband. On April 14, 1989, she arrived at the local hotel where the gathering was taking place. As she entered, she was met by George himself. Seeing him, she felt anxious that he might recognize her from previous surveillance. She took a deep breath and looked for any indication that he knew her, but Treppel didn't seem to remember her. Still, she had to stay alert in her undercover role. She understood that Treppel was not likely to confront someone directly. He preferred to poison his victims, leading to a slow and painful death. The agent signed up for the event and received a packet with all the weekend details prepared by Treppel himself. The pamphlet outlined several carefully crafted murder scenarios, including one that involved poisoning. One paragraph caught her attention. It stated that when a death threat arrives, cautious individuals should discard all their food and be mindful of what they consume. This alarming similarity reminded she of the death threat the Carr family had received just before Peggy was poisoned, reinforcing her belief that they had identified the right suspect. Throughout the weekend, the agent spoke with Treppel, carefully monitoring his every word, aware that any mistake could cost her life. When Treppel inquired about her background, she fabricated a story about her husband, a lawyer from Houston, Texas, whom she claimed to have left. Treppel revealed that he could detect lies by observing the movement of a person's neck muscles, which made she even more anxious. Before the weekend concluded, she revealed to Treppel her plan to move to Florida in order to escape her husband. This confession led to an important development. Treppel mentioned that he and his wife were considering relocating their practice and selling their house. After meeting with her supervisors, the agent was told to extend her undercover operation beyond the original weekend. She recognized this as an opportunity to gather important evidence that could lead to a search warrant for Treppel's house. Her goal was to find lab equipment or chemicals that would connect Treppel to the crime. The next week, she visited Treppel's house. During the visit, Treppel bragged about how safe Alturas was and how nobody locked their doors. While she spotted several suspicious items, such as a secret passage in the library and a mannequin dressed in bondage gear, none of these were enough to obtain a search warrant. Despite her failed plan, the agent continued to act, committed to collecting more evidence. She understood the dangers involved. Revealing her real identity could put her and her family at risk. Treppel, who was very clever, might resort to poisoning her if he found out she was an undercover detective. Over the next few months, she met with Treppel for several lunch dates, always being watched closely. She avoided eating or drinking anything after leaving the table, cautious of Treppel's potential to harm her. During these meetings, Treppel progressively showed his contempt for those he deemed less intelligent, which provided she with a glimpse into his mindset. After 8 months, the agent had gathered many small pieces of evidence, but it wasn't enough to form a strong case. Her supervisors started to doubt the operation's worth and considered shutting it down. For the agent, giving up was not an option. She felt a deep responsibility to seek justice for Peggy Carr and her family. thinking about how it could have been her own loved ones who ingested the poison. In December 1989, the agent received an important call she had been anticipating. George and Diana Trepal had relocated and offered her the opportunity to move into their home. With this offer, the agent gained legal permission to enter the house without needing a warrant, allowing her to invite the county crime scene unit to conduct an investigation. Suspecting that Trepal was too intelligent to leave obvious signs of thallium, the investigation team concentrated on searching for residues in areas such as the air conditioning filter and drains. The house still contained many of Trepal's belongings, which provided plenty of chances to collect samples. In the garage, investigators found vials and chemistry bottles, hoping that one of them would test positive for thallium. While waiting for results from the FBI lab, the agent struggling to come up with new ways to engage Trepal. As time passed, she realized that by January 1990, with no updates from the lab, she needed to take matters into her own hands. She aimed to trick Trepal into incriminating himself, not knowing that he was preparing his own deception. The agent scheduled a meeting with Trepal at a picnic area behind a McDonald's, near where he lived. This important meeting was recorded. During their discussion, she gave Trepal a business card that she claimed had been left by detectives looking for him. Trepal reacted noticeably. He became very anxious and visibly unsettled as he tried to stay calm. He repeatedly invited she to visit his new house, but she declined. The atmosphere was tense, leaving one to wonder what would have happened if she had accepted his invitation. After the meeting, Trepal appeared visibly shaken and deeply impacted by the news from her. This marked a critical moment in the investigation. On April 4, 1990, the agent received an unexpected phone call. The FBI had found thallium in one of the vials taken from Trepal's garage. The vial contained thallium nitrate, the same chemical used to poison Peggy Carr and to try to kill her entire family. This discovery provided crucial evidence to bolster the case against Trepal. On April 5th, George Trepal was arrested at his new home in Seguin. Seeing him led into the county jail in an orange jumpsuit marked the conclusion of a lengthy and dangerous investigation. Even when the agent revealed her true identity, Trepal remained calm. The special agent from the county sheriff's office presented him with a warrant for handwriting samples, to which Trepal simply smiled and said, "Oh, okay." She had narrowly escaped becoming Trepal's next victim. In January 1991, George Trepal's trial began with substantial evidence against him. Police found a journal in Trepal's home called General Poisoning Guides, which identified thallium as a common poison used by criminals. The journal included references to harming neighbors, and 55 fingerprints found in it matched Trepal's. The prosecution also presented the tools used to tamper with the Coke bottles, including a set of tiny screwdrivers. One screwdriver was missing and fit perfectly with the marks on the bottle caps, which was incriminating evidence that shocked the jury. Throughout the trial, Trepal maintained a calm and emotionless demeanor, even smiling at times. His lack of remorse and his premeditated actions revealed a disturbing level of malice. He rationalized his cruel actions by claiming he was more intelligent than others and believed that those he deemed less intelligent did not have the right to live. The trial lasted for 2 months, but the jury took only 4 hours to reach a decision. On March 6, 1991, nearly 2 years after Peggy Carr's death, George Trepal was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death. According to the Florida Department of Corrections, inmates on death row wait an average of 12.7 years for execution. Trepal passed that milestone nearly 8 years ago. With this verdict, justice was served for Peggy Carr. The special agent's unwavering dedication and bravery played a crucial role in bringing this criminal to justice. She put her life at risk to ensure that Trepal was held accountable for his horrific actions. Reflecting on her commitment, one can't help but admire her courage. She went above and beyond to ensure that Peggy's killer faced justice, earning the respect and gratitude of many. The other members of Peggy Carr's family, who also experienced poisoning, fully recovered. However, The loss of Peggy deeply affected her son Dwayne. Losing his mother at just 16 years old was a traumatic event that left him with lasting emotional pain. In the years after her passing, Dwayne struggled with his grief, frequently expressing it through anger and emotional outbursts. Eventually, he discovered comfort in writing letters to his mother, where he shared his feelings. He promised to work on improving his life. Dwayne fulfilled his promise. Today, he is married and is the supportive father his family needs. Each day, he works hard to make his mother proud and honor her memory. Dwayne exemplifies the strength of the human spirit, proving that even after facing great tragedy, it is possible to live a meaningful life. On June 28, 2023, local authorities in Andover received a call from a worried resident. The caller was concerned about his elderly neighbor, Stuart, who had not been seen outside for several days. Stuart was known for his regular routine and interactions with others, making his sudden disappearance concerning. His front door was closed, and he had missed his usual walks. Officers were sent to the location, and after getting legal permission, they entered the house. Upon entering, they were immediately greeted by a strong odor. The house seemed to be occupied, but was in disarray. Their attention was drawn to the living room, where they found the man's body on the floor, partially covered by a white sheet. A fan was on, running at full speed and directed right at the body. The arrangement of the room sparked many questions. A turned-off cell phone was located on the coffee table next to its charger. Handwritten notes, some with aggressive or hostile statements, were scattered on the floor and were collected for further forensic examination. There were no indications of forced entry or theft, as valuable items remained undisturbed. Close to the body was a small Pomeranian dog that seemed calm and showed no visible injuries. Investigators discovered signs of illegal substances in the kitchen, including used syringes, packaging materials, and remnants of unknown substances. These items were thoroughly recorded and sent for lab analysis. There were no blood traces found on the walls or furniture, but the body's condition suggested that death occurred several days earlier. The level of decomposition and changes in the skin confirmed this timeline. Additionally, the body's position and markings on the arms indicated a possible attempt at self-defense. Right from the beginning, it was clear that this was not a natural death. Several factors raised serious concerns: the position of the body, the state of the room, the running fan, the notes, and the dog left alone. As a result, the authorities began a comprehensive investigation. The investigation quickly established that the body found was that of Stuart Crocker, a 62-year-old man who was found dead in his small home, which he had owned for many years. He was a retired British Army veteran receiving a military pension. Although he lived alone, he kept in regular touch with his family, including his children and ex-spouse. Those who knew him described Stuart as kind, calm, and always ready to assist others. He had no known conflicts with his neighbors or relatives. During the initial investigation, detectives reviewed footage from surveillance cameras on nearby homes. One video showed an unknown woman entering the residence approximately 5 days before the body was discovered. After her departure, there were no recordings of anyone else entering the home. Interviews later showed that a few weeks before his death, Stuart had permitted a woman to stay with him. His family did not know the details about how she came to be there. He had only briefly mentioned that he was helping out an acquaintance who had no place to stay. None of his relatives remembered her name, and there was no further information available. According to his ex-wife, Stuart referred to this situation as providing temporary help to someone in need, but he did not explain their relationship further. Neighbors reported seeing a young woman at the house, frequently with a dog, smoking on the porch. They mentioned an increase in noise, including occasional shouting, but no specific aggressive incidents were observed. Her behavior appeared odd. She often arrived and left at irregular hours, came back with shopping bags, talked on the phone a lot, and sometimes filmed herself. During the investigation of the cell phone found at the scene, detectives discovered an active TikTok account belonging to the woman who had been living with Stuart Crocker in the weeks before his death. The account name Winter contained numerous videos posted throughout June 2023, some of which were uploaded after the estimated date of Crocker's death and were clearly recorded in the room where his body would later be found. In one video, Winter spoke directly to her viewers, introduced herself, and mentioned that she was taking a break from posting. With a casual smile, she concluded her message by saying she has been a bad girl, appearing carefree as if nothing serious had occurred. In a separate video, she expressed that she felt hungry and mentioned she was going out to buy groceries. The setting matched the area where Crocker's body was discovered. Location data and footage from neighborhood security cameras confirmed that she did leave the house after recording the video. She went to a nearby grocery store where she bought food and a leash for her small dog. A witness at the store observed her talking to a man she seemed to know. During their conversation, she claimed she would soon be famous, saying, "People are going to hear about me." She appeared calm and relaxed, showing no signs of panic or any intention to escape. On social media, Winter often shared her love for a small Pomeranian named Oblivion. The dog regularly appeared in her videos and captions. She mentioned that she loved the dog more than people, referring to it as the only one you can trust. Videos featuring the dog continued to be shared even after Crocker's death, suggesting that she may have stayed in the home for several days after the incident. Her phone not only contained videos, but also several messages, including drafts of letters to a man named Edward Jones, 44. In these messages, she detailed the incident and took full responsibility for Crocker's death, mentioning that she stayed near the body while writing. She also expressed her intention to write a book about her experience, believing it would bring her fame and money. The messages convey a boastful tone, with no indication of remorse or mention of self-defense. The investigation also included video clips showing Winter trying to provoke Crocker into a conversation by asking unrelated questions to elicit specific responses. In the videos, Crocker appeared confused and did not show any aggression, frequently stating that he didn't understand what was happening. None of the footage revealed any hostile behavior from him. Investigators created an initial understanding of the events based on the evidence they gathered. Following Crocker's death, Winter continued to reside in his home, using his belongings without hesitation and posting about it online. Winter Swan Miller was born on November 13, 1986. Her mother worked diligently to support them, aiming to create a stable and calm home despite financial challenges. Winter later reflected positively on this time, noting that her mother was her primary source of support and her closest companion. Her father was not present in her life until she was about 7 years old. He re-entered her life unexpectedly. He lived in Cornwall, far from her home, but started taking her during school breaks. Unfortunately, instead of being caring, these visits caused her emotional distress. He often made hurtful comments, criticizing her appearance and expressing disappointment in her. These negative remarks damaged her self-esteem and made her feel rejected, insecure from an early age. To gain her father's approval, Winter tried changing her appearance, thinking it would make him accept her. However, he remained indifferent. At school, she faced bullying, social pressure, and loneliness. During this time, her emotional struggles became evident as she withdrew from social interactions, lost interest in school, and started skipping classes. Instead of helping her, her father made things worse by promoting aggressive behavior, escalating conflicts, and reinforcing negative beliefs. The most concerning incident happened when he took her away without her mother's permission. For almost 5 months, no one knew where she was. When Winter came back, she was in very poor condition, both physically and emotionally. She later spoke about having experiences during that time that were clearly wrong and have left her with lasting emotional wounds. From her perspective, her father's behavior indicated troubling intentions that were far from what a caring parent would show. Although these allegations were never officially recorded, the psychological effects were clear. After she was reunited with her mother, She lost all contact with her father, but the harm had already been done. Winter did not get the support she needed from social services or educational systems. Due to her experiences, she developed a deep mistrust of others, a persistent feeling of danger, and a defensive attitude, even in safe situations. By her teenage years, these patterns of emotional detachment, avoidance, and instability had become firmly established. At school, Winter was considered a troubled teenager. However, her behavior was not due to aggression, but rather a profound lack of emotional safety. The traumas she experienced were never adequately addressed, leading to instability that went unnoticed at the time. By the age of 15, Winter had entirely withdrawn from the formal education system. After numerous absences and worsening conflicts at school, she decided to stop her studies altogether. Although her mother attempted to support her education through home tutoring, outside influences had already eclipsed their efforts. Winter found herself surrounded by banned substance, inappropriate behavior, and relationships with much older individuals. At 14, she became involved with a man in his mid-20s who was over a decade older than her. This relationship had a clear power imbalance. He manipulated her psychologically, controlling her daily choices and appearance. He often made demeaning comments, highlighting her flaws, making her feel inadequate. Instead of support, she experienced constant criticism and emotional isolation. To manage her rising internal stress, Winter increasingly turned to banned substance. What started as casual use quickly escalated into a regular habit and eventually addiction. Her efforts to quit often resulted in setbacks, making it harder for her to navigate daily life and maintain emotional stability. During this period, Winter also began changing partners frequently. These relationships became more about transactions such as housing, financial assistance, or using banned substance together than genuine emotional connections. This pattern created a cycle of instability that she couldn't break free from. In 2009, at the age of 23, Winter was involved in a legal case after being charged with causing bodily harm. The specific details of the incident were not disclosed, but she received a non-custodial sentence. This incident marked the beginning of a pattern of aggressive behavior in her life. Additionally, issues related to substance use, declining mental health, and an increasing tendency to engage in conflicts contributed to her instability. As Winter's life progressed, she began to pursue unique hobbies, particularly collecting different kinds of bladed items, including knives, brass knuckles, and decorative swords. Her collection expanded steadily over time. The way she showcased these items in her home and frequently referenced them in her writing indicated that her interest went beyond mere aesthetics. They appeared to represent a desire for control and a psychological defense mechanism. Given her overall behavior, this hobby raised alarms among the few individuals who remained in contact with her. During this time, Winter's mental health was quite unstable. She experienced frequent mood swings, intense irritability, and sudden emotional breakdowns. Even though it was clear she was struggling, she chose not to seek professional help. This choice was rooted in her deep mistrust of support systems and her belief that she could handle everything on her own. While this showed her desire to stay in control, it also meant she missed out on important support that could have helped her. As Winter approached a new chapter in her life, she found herself in a vulnerable state. She struggled with unstable relationships, frequent substance use, legal issues, and growing feelings of isolation and inner conflict. About a year after her first legal troubles, Winter experienced a brief period of stability in her life, which coincided with the start of her relationship with a woman. Friends noted that this was the first time Winter had a long-term, stable partnership. Their relationship developed slowly and steadily, without any public drama or sudden changes. Her partner was older and had a calm personality. Importantly, she did not try to control Winter. For the first time, Winter felt emotionally safe and truly accepted. With her newfound stability, Winter started to explore different career options. She began by working as a veterinary assistant and later moved into pet care. As time went on, she honed her grooming skills and began providing dog grooming services. Although the work wasn't consistent, it gave her a sense of purpose and some financial independence. During this period, Winter adopted her own dog, a Pomeranian named Oblivion. She frequently posted photos and videos of him, often expressing that she trusted him more than other people. Winter lived with her partner for approximately 5 years. During this period, she avoided serious legal issues, maintained a small group of friends, and rarely discussed her past. Former acquaintances noted that she appeared calmer and more reserved. However, she did not completely cease using illegal substances. Although it happened less often, it continued to be her method of dealing with stress and anxiety. Her partner's unexpected passing had a profound impact, primarily due to her rapid decline in health. This loss was a significant turning point for Winter. For a long time, she struggled to manage her emotions, turned back to substance use, distanced herself from others, and stopped following her usual routines. During this difficult period, she increasingly sought refuge in digital platforms, particularly TikTok. Her content included a mix of short videos, dancing, lip-syncing, appearances with her dog, and often provocative clips. Occasionally, she would share authentic moments, personal thoughts, emotional outbursts, pleas for help, and feelings of loneliness. As a result, her account quickly gained thousands of followers. The attention, especially from male viewers who complimented her and sent numerous messages, temporarily elevated her self-esteem and made her feel seen. She actively interacted with her audience, fostering engagement. On TikTok, Winter created an alternate persona that appeared confident, vibrant, and daring, while in reality, she was dealing with a severe internal crisis. As her dependency increased, her social media posts became less stable and more chaotic. She began appearing on camera in loungewear, often showing clear signs of emotional exhaustion. Concerned viewers left worried comments on her videos, but Winter usually did not reply. Although it may have looked like she was trying to rebuild her life, it was really an escape from reality. During this period, she became involved in events that would eventually gain significant public attention. By early 2023, Winter was struggling with social and psychological issues. She lacked a reliable income, continued to use illegal substances, and often stayed overnight at various friends' homes. During this difficult period, she met Stuart Crocker, a kind-hearted older man living alone in Andover. They were introduced through a mutual friend involved in informal substance use circles. When Winter shared her situation of being homeless and facing threats from others, Stuart generously offered her a place to stay temporarily. Soon after, Winter moved in with her dog. Stuart willingly helped take care of the pet. The first few days of their cohabitation seemed peaceful. She prepared meals, chatted with him, and took charge of household chores, which seemed like a way of showing appreciation for her accommodation. However, things soon changed. Winter began to involve herself in aspects of Stuart's life that went far beyond their original agreement. At the same time, Stuart's communication with his family started to fade. His sons and ex-wife became increasingly worried as they noticed his spending was rising and his regular contact had almost ceased. When they voiced their concerns, Stuart simply said he was helping someone in need and dismissed their criticism. Attempts by his family to talk to him directly were often blocked by Winter. Over time, Winter began managing Stuart's finances and personal matters. She took care of paperwork for his benefits, used his bank cards, and made purchases, many of which were for her own needs. Although she presented her actions as support and assistance, they actually indicated complete control over his life. In the final weeks of Stuart Crocker's life, he became entirely dependent on someone he thought he could help. During this time, there is no evidence of him showing aggressive behavior or making threats. On June 23, 2023, a significant incident occurred at Stuart Crocker's home. The dispute began between Stuart and Winter when she accused him of giving her dog away to strangers, a claim that turned out to be false since the dog was later found unharmed at home. The argument escalated when Winter attacked Stewart with a sharp object, causing multiple injuries mainly on his back, chest, and neck by 26 stab wounds. Defensive wounds on his hands indicated he tried to fend her off. After the initial assault, Winter further restricted his breathing using a handbag strap. The cause of death was identified as a combination of blood loss and mechanical asphyxiation. After the incident, Winter stayed at the scene. She covered Stewart's body with a white sheet, turned on the TV and a fan to direct air at the area, and remained in the house for several more days. On the same day, Winter invited a new friend into the house, even with Stewart's body present. They reportedly used illegal substances together and recorded videos. The next day, they left town and went to Birmingham, where they stayed hidden for 5 days. Winter Swan, Miller 37, was arrested on June 30th without any resistance. The man who was with her at the time of her arrest had no involvement in the crime. He was briefly questioned about unrelated charges concerning the unauthorized use of Crocker's bank cards, but was released soon after. Winter was taken into custody, but during interrogation, she did not cooperate, replying no comment to every question. The investigation collected a significant amount of evidence, including surveillance footage, videos from Winter's TikTok account, handwritten notes, audio recordings, letters, and digital communication. Authorities determined that the act was planned in advance. During the trial in 2024, prosecutors presented all the evidence. In an unexpected turn, the defense changed their story. Winter claimed that Stewart had threatened, manipulated, and violated her personal boundaries. However, these claims were not backed by medical records or prior complaints. In her letters, following the incident, she did not mention any mistreatment. Instead, her tone was degrading towards the victim and focused on justifying her own actions. Videos recorded by Winter before the incident contradicted her defense, showing Stewart Crocker as calm, not exhibiting any aggression, and reacting to her confrontational questions with confusion, clearly unaware of the implied accusations. The court found that Winter Swan Miller acted intentionally, motivated by self-interest and personal animosity. She was convicted of intentionally causing death under serious circumstances. The judge sentenced her to 23 years in prison. The sentencing statement highlighted the manipulative and premeditated nature of her actions and dismissed any claims of self-defense. Additionally, the court mentioned that she tried to use the incident for her own publicity. The dog discovered at the scene has been relocated to a new family. Animal welfare authorities report that the pet has adapted well and is now in a safe home. Stewart Crocker's funeral was held privately, attended only by close family. During the service, his sons and ex-wife shared heartfelt memories, describing him as kind, generous, and always eager to assist others. They highlighted how his trusting nature ultimately contributed to the tragic event. The case gained significant public interest, especially because of the dramatic social media posts, the lack of remorse shown, and the deliberate nature of the crime. Leslie Perlow, a 21-year-old woman, worked at the law library in the Palo Alto courthouse in California and lived there with her family. She led a normal life and was studying at Stanford University at the time of a tragic incident in 1973. With ambition and determination, she focused on developing her career before thinking about settling down and starting a family. On Tuesday, February 13, 1973, Leslie was last seen leaving work around 3 p.m. When she did not return home, her family initially assumed she might have gone for her usual walk around the Stanford campus, but as time passed and she still hadn't appeared, they began to worry. After contacting friends and colleagues, but no one had any information about her, the family organized a search. When their efforts led nowhere, they reported her missing to the police, who took the situation seriously and began investigating. 2 days later, on February 15th, officers discovered Leslie's body in bushes near the university campus. She had been strangled with her scarf and showed clear signs of a brutal attack, including bruises covering her body. Evidence revealed that she had been abused, and her underwear and pantyhose were stuffed into her throat. She was partially undressed, and blood stained her clothing. The autopsy confirmed strangulation as the cause of death, and further evidence, nail clippings and bodily fluids, indicated she had fought back fiercely. At the time, forensic technology, such as DNA profiling, was not advanced, and there were no criminal databases near where the body was found. Police found Leslie's orange Chevrolet Nova abandoned near an old, deserted building. Her shoes were still in the car, but no significant evidence was gathered from the car or the scene. Despite efforts to identify suspects, none of Leslie's friends, family, or colleagues could provide clues. Leslie, described by everyone as calm and unassuming, made the murder a huge shock to all who knew her. The investigation quickly stalled after all potential suspects close to Leslie were ruled out through verified alibis. After 5 days, law enforcement turned to the public for help, releasing details about her car and its isolated parking location, hoping for witnesses. Police received several tips through phone calls, though none led to viable leads. A month later, authorities discovered the body of a young man named Mark Roswell, who had died just half a kilometer from where Leslie was found. Mark has ties to the court where Leslie works, is currently on probation for distributing illegal substances. Investigators looked into the possibility of a connection between Leslie and Mark, suspecting that Mark's case may have been motivated by guilt. However, interviews with courthouse staff confirmed there was no known relationship between the two. Family and friends of both Leslie and Mark were unable to establish any link. After thoroughly investigating Mark's background, detectives found no evidence suggesting a history of violent crime. His only prior offense was dealing banned substances. Ultimately, Mark was ruled out as a suspect. Despite significant efforts, Leslie's case remained unsolved. During this time, a new lead surfaced when a police officer contacted the station. Although he had been off duty on the night Leslie was killed, he had seen her car by chance while driving home through a secluded area. According to his report, on Tuesday, February 13th, he noticed an orange Chevrolet parked near an abandoned building. The sight caught his attention because the location was usually deserted. Alongside the Chevrolet, he saw a gray car and a young man with long blonde hair standing between the two vehicles. Leaning over as if speaking to someone, he observed the situation for a while, but did not notice anything overtly suspicious, so he continued on his way. While his account provided some useful information, he unfortunately didn't recall the license plate of the gray car. Based on certain evidence, detectives began to suspect that Leslie might have been the victim of not just a violent crime, but also a serial killer. Their suspicions were reinforced by the fact that several serial killers were active in the state during the early 1970s. The media immediately picked up on this theory, and over the years, speculations arose that Leslie might have been a victim of infamous killers like the Zodiac or Herbert Mullin, both of whom were responsible for multiple murders in the region. Even Ted Bundy was considered a suspect, as he was attending school in San Francisco during this period and lived near Stanford. Another theory attributed her death to a cult known as the Angels of Death, whose victims were found in San Francisco. However, as the investigation struggled to gain traction, detectives explored every lead. Over time, prominent suspects such as Ted Bundy, the Zodiac, and others were cleared of involvement. A year after Leslie's tragic death, another devastating incident shook the community. On Sunday, March 24, 1974, 21-year-old Janet Taylor was preparing for a busy day of work and visiting friends. Her car had broken down the day before and was in the repair shop, so her father gave her a ride to work. After finishing her shift, Janet planned to stop by her friend Deborah's house. Janet was a young woman full of ambition. She had recently turned 21 and was the daughter of a well-known university coach. She worked hard as a university student and dreamed of a successful career. That evening, after spending time with Deborah, Janet realized around 7 p.m. that she urgently needed to return home to let the dogs out for a walk. Wanting to avoid inconveniencing anyone, she refused to call her father or accept Deborah's help. Instead, she decided to hitchhike to her home in La Honda, a short distance away in an area surrounded by nature reserves near Stanford. Confident in her decision, Janet believed there was no reason to worry, and Deborah didn't perceive any danger either, a mistake that would prove to be fatal. The next morning, Janet's boyfriend noticed that she hadn't returned home. Alarmed, he contacted her friends and family to try to determine what had happened, but no one had seen her. Later that same morning, a milk delivery driver traveling near Stanford noticed something suspicious on the side of the road. When he stopped to investigate, he made a horrifying discovery. It was the body of a young woman. When the police arrived, they identified the victim as Janet Taylor. She had been strangled with her own sweater. Although she was clothed, her shoes were missing. Oddly, her feet were clean, despite the heavy rain the night before. While her body was damp, the ground underneath was dry, suggesting she had been placed there after her death. Janet's clothes were torn, and, like Leslie's, her underwear and stockings had been forcibly shoved into her throat. Investigators confirmed that she had been abused before being killed and subjected to prolonged beatings. Some of her belongings were missing initially, but were later found scattered along the roadside. Her clothes had been discarded over a stretch of approximately 500 meters on both sides of the road, leading investigators to believe the killer had deliberately disposed of them while driving. Janet's body was discovered just 2 kilometers away from the location where Leslie's body had been found the previous year. Not only did both women share a striking similarity in appearance, but the perpetrator also used similar methods in both crimes. These resemblances strongly suggested that the 2 women had fallen victim to the same serial killer. The shocking connection alarmed the community, heightening concern as the realization of a potential serial murderer set in. Rumors quickly spread that a maniac was active in the area, leaving residents feeling unsafe. People criticized the police for failing to stop the violent crime wave gripping the city. One curious detail united the victims: they were all found barefoot, with their shoes discovered far from their bodies. The victims, all young women, were similarly dressed in raincoats, a coincidence likely explained by the weather. However, the absence of their bags appeared deliberate. It was confirmed that Leslie and Janet had carried bags, but these were never recovered. Some speculated that the killer kept the items as trophies, a behavior often associated with serial offenders. Once the similarities in the cases were identified, the 2 police departments began collaborating. Shortly after Janet's murder, Peter Thompson was attacked in a seemingly unrelated incident on March 30, 1974 in California. At 4:20 am, a passing motorist discovered Peter, bloody and injured, near his parked car by the roadside. The motorist called for help, and police arrived to investigate. In the back seat of Peter's car, they found broken beer bottles, which appeared to have been used to cut his face. Peter explained to detectives that he had picked up a hitchhiker who attacked him after provoking a conflict. Meanwhile, forensic experts searched the area around Peter's car and the spot where the hitchhiker was allegedly picked up. Nearby, they discovered an open beer pack matching the broken bottles found in Peter's car. At the same time, a deputy sheriff reported seeing a suspicious man with long blonde hair who ran away upon noticing the officer. Unfortunately, the man evaded capture. It is noteworthy that a person with similar characteristics was also seen near the scene of Leslie's murder. Detectives questioned Peter further, during which something unsettling emerged when asked for his contact information. Peter provided the details of a woman named Barbara Rocky, claiming he had met her before. Investigators soon learned, however, that Barbara had been murdered 2 weeks earlier, on March 11, 1974, in Utah, near the Grand Canyon. Barbara, a 22-year-old college student, had been killed after voluntarily going with her attacker. She was abused and then shot 5 times in the back with her own Magnum .357 pistol. Chillingly, her killer had carefully folded her clothes beside her body, suggesting an emotional attachment to her. Barbara's death raised further questions. Detectives discovered that she was acquainted with Janet Taylor, one of the other victims, a connection that appeared too coincidental to ignore. Peter's claim of knowing Barbara came under intense scrutiny, especially since he appeared confused during questioning and delayed his responses, as though crafting a story. However, the investigation ultimately revealed no evidence linking Peter to the murders. He had no motive, and it was confirmed that he was not in Utah at the time of Barbara's death. His account of the hitchhiker attack remained plausible, with no conclusive evidence to prove or disprove it. Nevertheless, investigators continued exploring possible connections between Barbara and the other victims, interviewing those close to her. This effort led them to Gerald Hicker, a former university classmate of Barbara's with a documented history of violence against women. Further investigation revealed that Gerald was responsible for Barbara's murder. Despite this breakthrough, no evidence linked Gerald to the murders of Leslie or Janet, even though Barbara's case bore similarities to the others. Ultimately, Gerald was charged only in Barbara's death, leaving the murders of Leslie and Janet unsolved. In March 1975, a year after Janet's disappearance, the investigation into her case took an unexpected turn. A local journalist reported that San Mateo County Sheriff's deputies had searched a rental room based on a tip from an anonymous source. The room had been rented by a long-term tenant who had moved out a few weeks earlier. The tenant was reportedly behaving suspiciously, and during the search, police discovered photographs of a woman resembling Janet Taylor, along with a newspaper article about her murder. The young man who had occupied the room was quickly located. However, he remained calm and claimed to have been a close friend of Janet. Witnesses confirmed their friendship, and his possession of the photographs and the newspaper clipping was deemed innocent memorabilia. As a result, he was not arrested. In July 1975, the San Mateo newspaper published another story, reporting that investigators working on Barbara's murder were exploring possible links to Janet's case and had uncovered new leads. Though no specific suspect was mentioned, a police officer stated that progress had been made and an arrest was expected soon. At that time, it seemed as if investigators were once again considering Peter Thompson's involvement. Janet and Barbara were acquaintances who were killed within 2 weeks of each other. Peter Thompson, a mutual friend, died under suspicious circumstances shortly after their deaths. Witnesses reported seeing a long-haired hitchhiker who matched Peter's description, driving a car associated with Leslie's disappearance. However, Peter was eventually ruled out as a suspect. After his death, the investigation stalled, and there were no significant developments for decades. The case remained dormant until 2008, when true crime enthusiasts speculated whether Ted Bundy could have been involved in the Stanford killings. Investigators explored this possibility but found no evidence connecting Ted to the crimes. By that point, law enforcement had determined with confidence that Barbara's murder was unrelated to the murders of Janet and Leslie. Despite these conclusions, murders continued to occur in the Stanford area, and new victims occasionally emerged. For instance, in October 1974, Alice Perry was found murdered. Like the others, there were no immediate suspects. Authorities believed a serial killer might be targeting victims around Stanford, further complicating efforts to solve the original cases. These investigations extended well into the 1980s. When Ted Bundy was arrested and sentenced to death in Florida, he began confessing to unsolved murders, eventually admitting to 23 killings across Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. However, no documented murders were tied to Leslie and Janet. Investigators made several attempts to link him to the Stanford murders, but all efforts failed. He was executed in 1989, by which time authorities had definitively ruled him out as a suspect in the murders of Janet and Leslie through DNA evidence. These cases remained unsolved for decades, with frustration further muddling the investigation. For example, serial killer Herbert Mullin, who confessed to murdering 13 victims, killed his last victim on the same day Leslie disappeared, just a few kilometers from where her body was later found. Similarly, Ted Bundy had reportedly been in the Stanford area at the time of Leslie's murder, and her appearance matched his victim profile. However, DNA evidence eventually excluded him as a suspect. For many detectives, coincidences are rarely dismissed, but in this case, the overlapping incidents only clouded the investigation and delayed progress. Meanwhile, the real killer remained at large. The cases saw no breakthroughs until 2016, when investigators reopened several cold cases. They revisited the murders of Leslie and Janet, this time utilizing innovative genetic genealogy techniques developed by Parabon Nanolabs. Law enforcement had collected DNA evidence from the abuse and suspected killer at the very beginning, and all samples were sent for genealogical analysis. This seemed promising because the company's innovative techniques had already solved several cold cases that had remained unsolved for decades. After completing the genealogical analysis, detectives received the results. Using the DNA profile, they created a family tree, and by 2018, the police identified a possible suspect. However, they couldn't confront him directly. Instead, detectives began discreetly monitoring 74-year-old John Gertrude. One day, during surveillance, John and his wife visited a coffee shop. After drinking his coffee, John discarded his cup in the trash. Detectives quickly retrieved the cup and sent it for testing. The DNA sample from the cup matched 100% with the traces found on the bodies of Leslie Perloff and Janet Taylor. In 2018, John was living with his wife in Hayward, California. He was arrested for the murders committed in 1973. 45 years after the crimes, investigators discovered that John, a medical technician at Stanford Hospital at the time, had no known connection to the victims. During the initial investigation, John had already attracted suspicion due to his criminal history. His record showed a pattern of incidents of an abusive nature, with his criminal behavior beginning in his youth. For instance, on June 8, 1963, when he was 18, John offered to walk 15-year-old Margaret Williams home after a dance near the military base where she lived with her family in Bad Kreuznach, Germany. Margaret never made it home. When Margaret missed her curfew, her family immediately alerted the police. Within 2 hours, her body was found. Witnesses helped authorities identify John as the perpetrator. He had taken Margaret to a baseball field, assaulted her, abused her, and killed her by striking her on the head. Found guilty, John faced a maximum sentence of 10 years under the laws at the time. Ultimately, he served 6 years in a juvenile prison and was released early in 1969 under the condition that he leave Germany. He returned to the United States, secured a job at a hospital, and married his colleague Susan, who had a daughter, Katie, from a previous relationship. For 8 years, John appeared to be a decent family man. However, during this time, he abused his stepdaughter Katie, threatening to kill her mother if she reported him. Katie later described him as a monster. In 1977, Susan caught John abusing her daughter Katie. They divorced, but for reasons unknown, Susan did not report the abuse to the police. A few months later, John married Linda Caputa, with whom he remained married for 24 years until her death in 2002. They had 2 children, and John appeared to be a loving and responsible father. For years, John's children and others believed the allegations against him were false, unaware that he had killed Leslie in 1973 and Janet in 1974. In 1975, however, John was involved in another crime that finally drew law enforcement's attention. He was charged with abusing a 17-year-old girl in Santa Clara County while serving as a leader of a youth scout organization. He pled guilty as part of a plea bargain and received a lenient sentence, 6 months in prison and a small fine. This crime demonstrated that he was prone to abusing and strangling his victims, but authorities still did not connect him to Leslie and Janet's murders. At one point, John was even considered a suspect. A San Mateo County Sheriff's deputy noticed that John's criminal behavior closely resembled the killer's methods in the Janet Taylor case. However, in the 1970s, DNA technology was unavailable, which prevented law enforcement from creating a DNA profile to confirm his guilt. Decades later, with advancements in DNA technology, John Guthrie was finally identified as the primary suspect in these brutal crimes. The investigators reanalyzed all the evidence they possessed at the time, which led to the development of a male DNA profile based on biological fluid traces collected from the victim's clothing. When this DNA was compared to a sample from John Guthrie, it was a 100% match, confirming him as the perpetrator. This revelation sparked mixed emotions, especially within the local community. Many criticized the police, as John had initially been wrongfully suspected of murdering Alice Perry. The true perpetrator, when approached for arrest, took his own life, a tragic pattern that would repeat decades later. However, John was far from blameless in other violent incidents. As investigators delved into his past, they uncovered that he had lived in Aga and New Jersey for several years, during which women frequently reported similar attacks. These findings suggested he may have been responsible for many more crimes. While authorities investigated John's potential involvement in other unsolved murders, prosecutors in 2 counties prepared for trials linked to separate cases. After the arrest of a suspect in Leslie's murder, the same individual was charged 6 months later with Janet's murder. In both cases, DNA evidence served as the primary foundation. Janet's and Leslie's families were determined to seek justice. They refused to negotiate, ensuring the criminal would face the full consequences of his actions. During the trial, Susan's daughter, Katie, who had suffered abuse at his hands and was familiar with John's cruel tendencies, provided crucial testimony. Upon learning about the murders, Katie was horrified to realize she could have become one of his victims. She recalled how she and John would pass the location where Leslie's body was found nearly every day on their way to school. At the time of both crimes, John was approximately 30 years old. Notably, witnesses described a suspect with long blonde hair at the scene, raising questions about whether John had an accomplice or whether he disguised himself by wearing a wig. On September 15, 2021, John Guthrie, then 77 years old and in custody, was convicted of Janet Taylor's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 2023, he confessed to Leslie Perloff's murder and received a second life sentence. While this confession offered some relief to the victims' families, it was devastating for John's loved ones, who had steadfastly believed in his innocence. Following these convictions, his children publicly disowned him. Later that year, John passed away in prison. According to the official report, his death was due to natural causes. Detectives remain convinced that he was responsible for other murders, but have yet to gather sufficient evidence to conclusively link him to additional crimes. It was just after 4:30 in the morning when the tracking app on Sade Robinson's phone suddenly went dark. Earlier that night, she had left work, excited about her first date with a man she'd recently met. By sunrise, her car was in flames, and along the shores of Lake Michigan, something unimaginable was waiting to be discovered. Sade Robinson was born in 2004 in Vicksburg, Mississippi. She is the daughter of Sheena Scarborough and Carlos Robinson. Her life changed early on when she was just a year old. Her parents separated. Sade then moved with her mother to Milwaukee, settling into her grandparents' home. This city would become the backdrop of her formative years and the place where her vibrant personality began to bloom. From the start, Sade stood out. She was curious, energetic, and always eager to learn about the world around her. She approached every activity, from soccer to Girl Scouts, with great enthusiasm. These early experiences not only allowed her to shine, but also helped shape her natural skills in leadership, teamwork, and discipline. Though Sade's father lived in Florida, she maintained a close bond with him. Frequent visits between states became a routine part of her life, and through them, she developed a rare sense of independence and responsibility at a young age. As she grew older, Sade's passions began to take clearer form. She was drawn to the arts, especially rap music and dance, where she could express herself freely. But her dreams weren't limited to the creative world. She also felt a deep desire to serve her country and envisioned herself someday joining the armed forces. Her academic record was equally impressive. Said was known as a standout student, always focused and determined. Yet, even with her achievements, she wasn't immune to challenges. During 7th grade, she encountered difficulties at school. As a result, she made the brave decision to relocate to Florida and live with her father, seeking a fresh start. Once again, Sade showed resilience in her new environment. She continued to excel, both socially and academically. Teachers and peers alike admired her focus, her ambition, and her quiet confidence, one that was rooted in strength rather than pride. In 2019, after spending several years in Florida, she returned to Milwaukee to live with her mother. When her final year of high school arrived in 2021, Sade poured herself into her studies, managing to graduate an entire semester early, yet another example of her unwavering determination. By 2024, at just 19 years old, Sade Robinson embodied a rare blend of discipline, ambition, and independence. She was pursuing a degree in art at Milwaukee Area Technical College, balancing her education with 2 full-time jobs. But her ambitions didn't stop there. She had already set her sights on a future in criminal law. Through sheer effort and careful, Sade was able to accomplish a major milestone. She bought her own car. It was more than just a vehicle. It represented her growing independence. Not long after, she moved out of her mother's home and rented her very own apartment. She balanced 2 demanding jobs to support herself. One of them was at Pizza Shuttle, where her work ethic, discipline, and initiative didn't go unnoticed. She quickly rose through the ranks and was promoted to manager. Her second job was at the prestigious Wisconsin Country Club, where she also helped her younger sister secure a position, making sure her sibling had access to the same opportunities that had shaped her own path. At that moment, her future looked incredibly bright. She had clear goals, the discipline to chase them, and the kind of maturity most people twice her age hadn't yet reached. Yet, behind all of that strength and focus, Sade still carried the hopes of any young woman her age. She dreamed of love, companionship, and a meaningful connection. What she never expected was that this search would lead her into the most dangerous moment of her life. April 1st, 2024 began like any other day for Sade. She started her morning shift at Pizza Shuttle, as she often did, took a few moments before work to catch up with her mother over FaceTime. Everything about the day seemed routine until the end of her shift. Sade was excited because she had a date planned that evening with a man she had recently met through a dating app. She left work to meet him. That would be the last time anyone in her group would see or hear from her. The following day, April 2nd, Sade didn't show up for her shift. She hadn't called in sick or left a message, which was completely out of character. Concern quickly spread among her co-workers. They began texting and calling her, hoping for an explanation, but there was no reply. Her family and close friends also began to worry. None of them had heard from her since the day before. As hours passed without a word, worry turned into panic. Those closest to her knew something was wrong. This was a chilling and inexplicable silence. As night fell and still no answers emerged, one of Sade's friends made the police and report her missing. Before doing so, she checked Sade's most recent social media activity and found something crucial: a Snapchat post of Sade. The timestamp was around 9 p.m. on the night of April 1st. That would be the final digital trace Sade left behind. On April 3rd, with no updates and mounting concern, police officers went to Sade's apartment. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer and no sounds from within. Unbeknownst to them, authorities elsewhere in the city had already made a horrifying discovery. At around 7:30 a.m. on April 2nd, 2024, the Milwaukee Fire Department received a report from local residents about a car on fire. When emergency crews arrived, they found thick smoke and flames engulfing a 2020 Honda Civic. The vehicle had been abandoned and was burning rapidly. firefighters managed to contain the blaze. No one was inside the car, but the contents of the trunk raised immediate concern. A black coat, a pair of ripped jeans, and other women's clothing, charred but still identifiable. A cell phone, partially damaged by heat, was also recovered. The authorities now had physical evidence, but they still needed to know who the car belonged to. That answer would come soon, and it would change everything. Later that same day, Milwaukee County Sheriff's deputies were called to a different location. A man waiting for a friend had been walking along the edge of a park's beach when he stumbled upon something horrifying, a human leg lying near the shoreline. Forensic teams were called in, and after careful analysis, they determined the leg belonged to an African-American female. The remains were dismembered, but the condition of the limbs suggested the crime had occurred recently. As the investigation into Sade's disappearance continued, one of the officers who had earlier visited her apartment learned of the discovery of the human remains. The physical description of the remains closely matched the details provided in the missing persons report for Sade. Then, a second chilling confirmation arrived. The Honda Civic found burning that morning was registered to Sade Robinson. With the pieces beginning to fall into place, detectives returned to her apartment. They spoke with the building's maintenance worker, who revealed that he had seen Sade on the morning of April 1st. She seemed excited and said she was looking forward to a date after her shift. Investigators pulled the building's surveillance footage, which showed Sade leaving her apartment at 9 p.m. On April 1st, she never returned. That footage, combined with the evidence from the car and the park, created an urgent new direction for the case. Authorities subpoenaed her phone records from her mobile carrier and traced her last text message to a number with a 262 area code. They didn't yet know who the number belonged to, but the content of the exchange made it clear it was the man she had planned to meet that night. Using that lead, police began cross-referencing phone data with surveillance footage. It soon emerged that Sade and her date had met at a local venue called the Twisted Fisherman. Footage from the bar and witness statements from staff confirmed their presence there that evening. Another key piece of evidence came from the same friend who had filed the missing persons report. She revealed that she had access to Sade's location through an app called Life 360, commonly used to track friends and family in real time. According to the app's log, the last known location for Sade Robinson was Warnemont Park at 4:30 a.m. on April 2nd. A clearer timeline began to take shape. Investigators learned that she was originally scheduled to meet her date at 5 p.m. on April 1st at a place called Brad House. However, at the last minute, the man changed the location to a different venue, Twisted Fisherman, a bar where he had previously worked. He claimed he needed to stop by to pick up some paperwork. Sade had no objection. At 5:20 p.m., she arrived at Twisted Fisherman. He was already there, waiting at the bar. The two sat side by side, ordered drinks and food, and chatted casually as the evening unfolded. Just over an hour later, they left the bar together, got into Sade's car, and drove to a second location, Duke's, another bar. They spent roughly 3 hours at Duke's before heading to a residential neighborhood in southwestern Milwaukee, where they remained for several more hours. At some point in the early morning hours of April 2nd, Sade's phone showed movement again, this time heading toward Warnemont Park. At 4:35, her Life 360 tracking app went silent. The battery had died. That was the last signal the phone would ever send. All signs pointed to one horrifying conclusion. Sade Robinson had been murdered, and the person she had trusted enough to meet that night was now the prime suspect. Thanks to swift and coordinated work by law enforcement, the investigation progressed rapidly. Authorities had already zeroed in on one individual. Though his name was still unknown to the public, police knew he was the last person to see Sade alive. The evidence they had gathered was enough to obtain both an arrest warrant and a search warrant for the residence traced from Sade's phone activity. On April 4th at 1 p.m., officers moved in. They arrived at the suspect's home and took him into custody. His identity was finally confirmed. Maxwell Anderson, a 33-year-old man and the son of a well-known businessman in the region. Following his arrest, disturbing details about his background began to emerge. Throughout his life, Anderson had exhibited a pattern of problematic behavior. His own father had once tried to help him by giving him a position in the family business, but eventually fired him, stating that he was unfit for the job. Anderson was also a U.S. Navy veteran, but in recent years he had drifted from one job to the next, working primarily as a bartender in various establishments across Milwaukee. None of the positions lasted long. Between 2014 and 2019, he had multiple arrests on record, mostly for minor offenses such as public disorder and disturbances. Investigators worked to determine exactly how Said and Anderson first met. The initial assumption was that they had connected through a dating app, but another theory surfaced. They may have crossed paths in person at one of the bars where Anderson had worked, locations that Said and her friends were known to frequent. Following the arrest of Maxwell Anderson, detectives launched an extensive search of his residence. What they found inside confirmed their worst fears. In one of the bedrooms, investigators discovered bloodstains on the bedding and on a wall leading down to the basement. That area, they soon realized, held even more disturbing clues. Inside the basement, they located multiple gas canisters and electric saws, items that raised immediate suspicion. The basement wasn't just a storage area, it appeared to have been prepared for something dark, something planned. The space, now a central point in the investigation, suggested that the crime against Said had been both premeditated and executed with chilling precision. The search for evidence did not stop there. On April 6th, just days after the house search, investigators returned to the area where Said's burned car had been discovered. Just 1 block away, they made another gruesome find: a human foot. The skin tone, size, and pink nail polish matched the severed leg recovered earlier. It belonged to Said. Meanwhile, detectives continued to comb through surveillance footage near the scene of the car fire. It was here they uncovered a critical piece of evidence. Security cameras captured Maxwell Anderson stepping out of Said's Honda Civic moments before setting it ablaze. Several bystanders in the area at the time later identified him as the man responsible. After starting the fire, Anderson was seen calmly walking away and boarding a nearby bus. But perhaps the most chilling revelation came from a key witness who knew Anderson personally. Alarmed by the news of Said's disappearance, this individual immediately went to the police. What they shared would reshape the entire investigation. A month before the crime, on March 5th, Anderson had allegedly described a plan to lure a woman to his basement, shoot her, dismember her body, and scatter the remains across the city. At the time, it seemed like a disturbing joke. In retrospect, it was a blueprint. The witness went on to describe a visit to Anderson's house just days before the murder. The basement, they said, was covered in plastic sheeting. There were 3 saws in plain view, a large tarp, and an area staged with intimate objects, further suggesting the calculated nature of the crime. Authorities feared there could be additional victims and began re-examining other reports linked to Anderson. In February 2024, a woman came forward claiming that after meeting Anderson at a bar, he invited her to his home. Once there, she began to feel unwell, leading her to suspect he had drugged her drink. She escaped before anything could happen. That escape may have saved her life. With mounting evidence, physical, digital, and testimonial, the prosecution built a powerful case. On April 12th, just 10 days after Said Robinson vanished, Maxwell Anderson was formally charged with first-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, and arson to conceal a crime. Though Anderson continued to claim innocence, the case against him was overwhelming. On the morning of June 6, 2025, the courtroom in Milwaukee was silent and tense. Families, reporters, and community members filled every seat. After months of grief, outrage, and unanswered questions, the moment had finally arrived. The jury had reached its decision. It took less than a day of deliberation, By 9:00 a.m. the next morning, their verdict was ready. Maxwell Anderson found guilty on all counts. First-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, hiding a corpse, arson. It was official. The man who had lured 19-year-old Sade Robinson on a first date only to brutally kill and dismember her was now legally responsible for one of the most horrifying crimes Milwaukee had ever seen. The trial had laid bare every excruciating detail. Jurors were shown hundreds of surveillance images and forensic photographs. They listened to the testimony of dozens of witnesses. They saw snapshots of Sade in her final hours, alive, vulnerable, and unaware of the fate awaiting her. The prosecutor made the case clear. Sade was killed inside Anderson's home. He later dismembered her body, her remains, legs, arms, torso, even her right breast were scattered across counties. Some were found in the lake, others washed ashore, and in an attempt to erase it all, he set her car ablaze and walked away. Maxwell Anderson did not testify, and his defense team called no witnesses. His lawyer claimed the murder wasn't planned. However, the evidence suggested otherwise, revealing a sequence of events that started like any other night but culminated in horrifying violence. Sade Robinson was ambitious and full of potential. She was a student at Milwaukee Area Technical College, held 2 jobs, and was actively shaping her future. That future was taken from her. Now, justice has been served. Sentencing is scheduled for August 15th, but for her loved ones, the real sentence is something far greater: life without her. Amy Beth Lord was born on December 21, 1988, in Springfield, Massachusetts. Her family moved to Wilbraham shortly after her birth, where she grew up with her 2 close sisters, Kimberly and Carly. The siblings shared a strong bond and enjoyed a loving family environment. After graduating high school in 2007, Amy pursued higher education at Bentley University, focusing on humanities, business, and marketing. Thanks to her remarkable intellect, she excelled academically and earned her bachelor's degree in 2011, becoming a certified marketer. Following her studies, Amy aimed to kickstart her career, relocating to Boston, Massachusetts. There, she quickly found a position as an internet marketing specialist and worked for 2 years. Life was going well. She made close friends and was in a relationship with Mike Cassell, with whom she was planning to start a family. On July 23, 2013, at 5:38 a.m., 24-year-old Amy was in the lobby of her apartment building. She had woken up early to meet her friend and co-worker, Christina Kelleher, for a gym session at 6 a.m. However, when Amy didn't arrive, Christina waited at the bus stop for a while before deciding to go to the gym alone, assuming her friend had overslept and didn't want to wake her. Although Amy was usually very punctual, Christina wasn't too concerned and expected to see her at work later, as their desks were next to each other. After finishing her workout, Christina was surprised to find that Amy was still not at the office. Feeling alarmed, she reached out to Mike, Amy's boyfriend, to check if he knew where she was. He had no idea and mentioned that he assumed Amy had gone to the gym. Over several hours, Mike and Christina tried repeatedly to reach Amy, but they were unsuccessful. At 11:30 a.m., Christina decided to contact the office manager. They had already called all of Amy's friends and acquaintances, but no one knew her whereabouts. Consequently, the management opted to report her missing to the police. After taking the report, the officers contacted Amy's parents, who had also not seen her. They agreed to meet with her relatives at her apartment in South Boston to investigate further, which happened around 2 p.m. Detectives searched the apartment for any evidence of a struggle, robbery, or other criminal activity, but found nothing out of order. Everything appeared to be in its place, and the locks were secure. It seemed that Amy had simply vanished. Her family emphasized that she led a happy and organized life. She had no plans for sudden trips and wouldn't have run away without informing anyone. They believed something must have happened to her. A contact lens belonging to Amy was discovered in the building's foyer, and there were also marks on the nearby wall, that suggested a possible confrontation. To gather more information about Amy, police interviewed her parents in detail. They revealed that Amy was driving a black Jeep Cherokee SUV. Shortly after, an officer recalled that at 8:37 a.m. in southern Boston, a fire had been reported. At that location, they found an SUV fully engulfed in flames. The fire department extinguished the fire and then towed the vehicle for further investigation. The car's description matched Amy's SUV. She had not yet been officially reported missing at that time. Although the license plates were completely burned away, the lab was able to identify the chassis number of the burned vehicle, confirming that it belonged to Amy Lord. Detectives returned to the station and started verifying Amy's bank transaction data. They discovered that her bank cards had been used to withdraw money 5 times that morning. Beginning at 6 a.m., the total amount withdrawn was approximately $1,000, and the withdrawals were made from different ATMs. This raised suspicions because it was unusual to withdraw money repeatedly from various locations in the city. The first transaction took place near her apartment. When the police arrived, they noticed a surveillance camera beside the ATM. They reviewed the footage, hoping to spot Amy in the morning recordings and gain insights into what happened. The process of reviewing the footage took considerable time, and officers examined recordings from all the ATMs where Amy's card had been used. They also found additional surveillance equipment on nearby buildings. All this evidence was gathered to piece together a clear timeline of events from that morning. While police were working with banks to collect footage, they received a call around 4 p.m. from a cyclist who had found a body at the Stony Brook Reservation in Hyde Park. The body was that of a young woman. Upon arrival, detectives discovered the victim was naked and had suffered over 40 stab wounds, primarily to her neck, face, and chest. There were also hand marks on her throat, suggesting she had been strangled. Her body was dumped in a secluded area covered with foxes, far from the city, but the killer did not attempt to conceal it. No identification was found. However, based on police photographs, they believed the victim was Amy Lord. Once her identity was confirmed, the missing person case transitioned into a murder investigation. The analysis of the CCTV recordings from the ATMs has been completed. The first sighting of Amy was at 6:35 a.m. She appeared alone at the ATM in her workout clothes and appeared uninjured. She used her ATM card and left. At 6:47 a.m., she arrived at another ATM just a few blocks away. This time, the camera captured her car from the outside. Amy was again unharmed and wearing sportswear. She withdrew cash by herself. However, her behavior was unusual. The police observed that, while the car was parked outside the bank, she was sitting in the passenger seat instead of the driver's seat. About 7 minutes later, she appeared in another video, this time with visible facial injuries, including a broken nose and several bruises, indicating she had been attacked. It seemed she had been kidnapped, yet she did not attempt to escape. Amy withdrew cash again and returned to the car, remaining in the passenger seat. Detectives tracked the car's movements throughout the city and obtained more recordings in an effort to identify the driver. The first shot showing Amy in the passenger seat and the driver behind the wheel was captured at 6:10 a.m. This helped them establish a timeline of events, but they still could not identify the driver's face. While reviewing the footage, the police noticed that the driver was hiding his face, possibly with a t-shirt or a headband. He wore a cap, and in one clip, when he adjusted it, it showed that he had a clean-shaven head. Detectives needed to find the exact moment Amy was abducted, so they continued gathering information from CCTV cameras. This effort led them to capture the moment Amy left her apartment. As soon as she opened the door, she was attacked by an unknown man who had been waiting outside. Pacing back and forth, he forced her inside, and they stayed behind the closed door for about 15 minutes. At 5:52 a.m., both of them came out and walked toward Amy's car. This suggests that the first cash withdrawal happened while she was being threatened. This information helped the police piece together the sequence of events. as soon as she left her apartment, preparing for a workout before heading to work. She was kidnapped. The attacker likely persuaded her that if she gave him enough money, he would let her go. As a result, Amy did not resist and complied with his demands. After withdrawing the required amount from her card, she was taken out of town and attacked with a knife. Following the murder, her body was left in a wooded area and her car was set on fire. The police were unable to obtain a clear image of the suspect's face. Investigators questioned Amy's relatives to check if anyone might have wanted to harm her, but she had no known enemies. Her boyfriend had a strong alibi and was ruled out as a suspect. The attacker needed gasoline to set the car on fire. In the video footage from when the attack started, the attacker was not seen carrying anything that looked like fuel. Therefore, he must have bought it at a gas station. After the attack, he drove 10 kilometers to a country park to dispose of the body before returning. Detectives reviewed all intersections with cameras where the perpetrator might have been seen. The investigation was challenging because the victim drove a common car. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of black SUVs in the city, but her relatives pointed out a distinctive clue, a cloverleaf-shaped sticker on the rear window. This made it easier to track her car in traffic and locate the gas station where the attacker had stopped. Unfortunately, the surveillance camera at that station wasn't working. Detectives noticed a liquor store across the street that had a front camera. They obtained some footage, but it was too distant to clearly see the criminal's face. At around 8 a.m., the suspect arrived at a gas station without Amy. The car was recognizable because of a cloverleaf-shaped sticker. Although the driver's face was not seen, he waved at someone and approached another person. They exchanged a few words, shook hands, and then the suspect's companion left. Fortunately, this person came closer to the liquor store's CCTV camera, allowing him to be identified. The police located him, had a conversation, and he revealed that he met his friend, 28-year-old Edwin Alamany, near the gas station. At 8 a.m., Edwin was in a black SUV that had not been seen before. He previously worked as a waiter's assistant and was currently unemployed. Early in the morning, on July 23, 2013, around 4:23, another resident of South Boston, Alexandra Cruz, was attacked just before Amy was kidnapped. Alexandra was walking to her job at Dunkin' Donuts when a stranger assaulted her in the parking lot, hitting her in the jaw and causing her to briefly lose consciousness. The attacker then began to strangle her, but suddenly stopped, claiming he had made a mistake and was looking for someone else. He threatened to kill her if she screamed. He took her valuables and turned away for a moment, giving her the chance to escape. Despite his threat that she would be killed if she reported him, Alexandra did not keep quiet. Once she arrived at work, she called the police. About an hour later, an officer came to take her statement, and they created a composite sketch of the assailant. During the investigation at Amy's apartment, the police received another urgent call. Around midnight in South Boston, a girl was stabbed. Detectives quickly recognized that this crime occurred near Amy Lord's apartment. This led them to believe they were dealing with a serial attacker, as there had already been 3 similar incidents involving girls. The investigation needed to continue, as the officers received a new call. 21-year-old Kaylee Ballantyne was attacked shortly after midnight. She was the only daughter in her family, raised alongside 2 older brothers, which may have contributed to her ability to defend herself. Her parents described her as a fighter from a young age. All the children in the family were athletic, but despite her delicate appearance, Kaylee displayed remarkable strength, sometimes even outdoing her brothers. In 2003, when she was just 11, she faced a serious incident when a basketball backboard fell on her head, leaving her in a coma for a month. Fortunately, she survived, recovered fully, and even resumed playing hockey. When the police spoke with the victim of the latest attack, Kaylee was injured, but still alive and able to recount her night. She had been working and was heading home around midnight. With her headphones on, she didn't notice any danger right away. As she approached her apartment, she noticed a suspicious-looking man on the opposite side of the street. He was large and appeared to be watching her. Then he crossed over to her side, stopped, and stared at her for about 5 seconds. This made her feel uneasy, so Kaylee hurried her steps. She got to her apartment and went to enter the code to get in. Initially, she entered it wrong, but got it right on the second try. When Kaylee opened the door, the man was right behind her. He put his hand on her left shoulder and pushed her through the door, his right hand holding a knife to her head. Kaylee fell to the floor, and the attacker pushed down on her, sitting on top of her. She pleaded for her life, asking him to take anything he wanted, but he began to stab her without saying a word. In a desperate attempt to protect herself, Kaylee crossed her left arm over her chest and started to fight back with her right hand. She also kicked at him. During the struggle, she successfully knocked the attacker's hand away, causing him to accidentally hurt himself and loosen his grip. Sports weren't merely a hobby for Kaylee, she was a professional athlete, strong and resilient, which helped her find the strength to fight back. This moment gave her the opportunity to save her life. After her attacker fell backwards and walked away. As he walked away, Kaylee slammed the door behind him so he couldn't come back. She remembered that she didn't know how many times she had been stabbed and that she didn't really feel any pain when it happened. She tried to stand up, but she collapsed and her chest tightened. She wondered if it was her adrenaline, if she was dying, and knew she needed to get into her apartment. Kaylee said that for some reason, her apartment key was in her pocket, which made it much easier, so she crawled to the apartment door, unlocked it, and went inside. Once inside, she crawled to her first roommate's room and told her that she had just been stabbed and that she needed her to get towels, tissues, or anything to stitch up the wound and then call 911. She insisted on calling her loved ones, worried that she might not make it through the attack. Her friends stayed calm and encouraged her to call emergency services first. Meanwhile, the neighbor took a video of everything Kaylee said. Remarkably, she managed to remain calm, even though she had sustained serious injuries: 2 stab wounds to her face and 2 to her neck. In total, the attacker had stabbed her 9 times, with 1 wound puncturing her left lung and another coming dangerously close to her heart. The trial of Edwin Alemany started in 2015 and lasted for 14 days. The key witness for the prosecution was Kaylee, the survivor. During her testimony, she displayed such inner strength that Edwin could not even look her in the eye. Alexander Cruz, the first victim, also testified against him. Edwin's defense attorney attempted to downplay his violent behavior, arguing that Edwin had tried to end his own life by cutting his wrists, which resulted in scratches on his neck and arms. Ultimately, Edwin was found guilty of first-degree murder for Amy's death, armed robbery, aggravated assault with a weapon, and attempted murder of Kaylee Ballantyne and Alexander Cruz. He never accepted responsibility or showed any regret for his actions. On June 9, 2015, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Amy and received an additional 35 years for the attacks on Kaylee and Alexander. When Kaylee gave her final statement, she shared her challenges in trying to live a normal life. Her heartfelt words brought many people in the courtroom to tears. Amy's parents gave Kaylee their late daughter's necklace as a token of gratitude for her testimony, which helped convict a dangerous criminal. However, Edwin, the criminal, never showed any remorse. In October 2020, he approached a federal judge to complain that his lawyers had been ineffective by opting for an insanity defense and admitting his guilt without his consent, despite him claiming he was innocent. In 2021, the state Supreme Court upheld his conviction. Edwin then hired a new lawyer and tried to formulate a different strategy to gain immediate release by pointing out the mistakes made by his previous attorney and the prosecution. However, these attempts were unsuccessful. After Kaylee recovered from her injuries, she returned to school and graduated from university. She lived in Boston until Edwin's case was resolved. After that, she decided to move to California to find peace away from big cities, hoping to cope with her post-traumatic stress disorder. Gradually, she healed from her psychological trauma and even began to dream again, which felt like a significant achievement. During this period, she felt intense anger towards Edwin for taking Amy's life and nearly ending hers too. Kaylee struggled to understand what could drive someone to such senseless cruelty. Over time, however, she began to feel pity for Edwin, recognizing the flaws in his character that led to his actions. Eventually, she wrote him a letter of forgiveness, but never sent it. It remained in her desk for 2 years. Then Kaylee tried to contact Edwin's lawyer, but received no response. Later, during a sermon about forgiveness at her church, she was reminded of the man who nearly took her life. Coincidentally, the pastor was visiting the prison where Edwin was held, so Kaylee asked him to deliver her letter. 2 weeks later, she received a response. In his letter, Edwin discussed his hard childhood. He was born in Puerto Rico and moved to the United States without speaking English. He shared the difficulties he encountered both at work and in his personal life, including experiences of bullying during his childhood. These challenges resulted in behavioral issues that ultimately led to him being in juvenile prison for a significant part of his youth. Initially, Kaylee felt compassion for him after reading the letter, but a few weeks later, she discovered that he was trying to appeal his case, claiming that his tough upbringing had broken him. This revelation made her question his sincerity, as she suspected he was trying to gain her sympathy. As a result, she decided not to reply to him. In the end, his appeal was denied, and he remains in prison. Kaylee hopes he is attending school and working on self-improvement. She believes he didn't ruin her life. Instead, he improved it. Kaylee has decided to turn her circumstances into something positive and feels happier than ever. Even though she faces daily anxiety and various challenges, she continues attending therapy and strives to maintain a positive outlook. After spending some time in California, she returned to Maine, where she currently resides. As a public speaker, she shares her story to inspire and support others who have experienced trauma. About a year ago, she stepped back from public speaking and is now seeking new ways to share her message. Kaylee feels passionate about her story because it has the potential to connect with others and create positive change in their lives. Currently, she works in marketing, is in a loving relationship, and has recently purchased her first home.